From the ashes of ancient empires, a new power would rise, forging a legacy of conquest, innovation, and enduring influence that reshaped 3 continents. This is not just a tale of sultans and swords, but of dreams born in the desert, laws carved in stone, and a civilization that dared to call itself the shadow of God on earth. Prepare to journey through 6 centuries of ambition, faith, and fire as we unravel the epic story of the Ottoman Empire, a story that still echoes in the world we inhabit today. The ancient world was a tapestry woven with the threads of 2 fading titans: the Byzantine Empire, a shadow of Rome's former glory, clinging to Constantinople, and the Sasanian Persian Empire, grand but exhausted from centuries of conflict. Their incessant wars had bled them dry, leaving a power vacuum in a forgotten corner of the world, the Arabian Peninsula. This inhospitable land, scorched by an unforgiving sun, was home to scattered tribes, fierce and independent, bound by ancient customs and a polytheistic faith that saw idols worshipped in the holy city of Mecca. It was a place of merchants and poets, of caravans traversing vast deserts, where the rhythm of life was dictated by trade and tribal loyalties. Yet, from this crucible of sand and strife, a revelation would emerge, a singular vision that would not only unite these disparate peoples, but ignite a civilization destined to reshape continents and challenge the very foundations of the known world. This is the story of how a merchant's revelation in a forgotten land blossomed into a global superpower, a story that echoes even in the complex social tensions of modern Europe, reminding us that history's currents run deep and long. In the bustling heart of Mecca, amidst the clamor of trade and the reverence for ancient gods, a man known for his integrity and trustworthiness, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, lived a life of quiet contemplation. Orphaned early, he found solace and purpose under the care of his uncle Abu Talib, and later, through his marriage to the remarkable Khadija, a successful businesswoman who recognized his innate wisdom and profound decency. Muhammad was al-Amin, the trustworthy one, a pillar of his community, yet he wrestled with the moral decay he witnessed around him, the injustices, the idolatry. He sought solitude in the caves of Mount Hira, retreating from the world to ponder the deeper truths of existence. It was in one such solitary vigil, in the year 610 CE, that the world shifted on its axis. A voice, clear and resonant, commanded him to read, a divine encounter that left him trembling, yet irrevocably changed. This was the dawn of Islam, a message of monotheism, justice, and submission to the one God, Allah. The initial years were fraught with peril. Muhammad's message, simple yet revolutionary, threatened the established order of Mecca, particularly the powerful Quraysh tribe who profited from the polytheistic pilgrimages to the Kaaba. His early followers, a small band of believers from all walks of life, faced ridicule, persecution, and even torture. Yet Muhammad persisted, his unwavering faith a beacon in the gathering storm. The Year of Sorrow in 619 CE brought immense personal tragedy with the deaths of both Khadija and Abu Talib, leaving him vulnerable and isolated. But even in despair, hope flickered. The city of Yathrib, later Medina, offered refuge, its inhabitants weary of tribal feuds and open to a new spiritual and social order. In 622 CE, under the cloak of night, Muhammad and his followers embarked on the Hijra, the migration that marked a turning point in Islamic history, a journey from persecution to the founding of a nascent community. Medina became the crucible of the new faith, a place where the theoretical principles of Islam were translated into a tangible social and political reality. Muhammad, now not just a prophet but a statesman, forged a constitution that united diverse tribes under a common banner, establishing a framework of justice and mutual protection. But the threat from Mecca remained potent. The young Muslim community was forced to defend its very existence, leading to a series of pivotal battles that etched themselves into the annals of history. At Badr, a small, outnumbered Muslim force achieved a miraculous victory against the larger Meccan army, a testament to their unwavering faith and strategic brilliance. The Battle of Uhud, though a partial setback, taught crucial lessons in discipline and leadership. Then came the Battle of the Trench, a siege where the Muslims, through ingenious defensive tactics, repelled a massive Confederate army, effectively breaking the Meccan blockade and securing Medina's future. These early struggles, born of necessity, forged a resilient and unified community, ready to spread its message far beyond the sands of Arabia. With Mecca eventually embraced peacefully and the Arabian Peninsula largely united under the banner of Islam, a new era dawned. The Prophet's passing in 632 CE left a void, but the momentum of the nascent Islamic state was unstoppable. The Rashidun Caliphate, led by Muhammad's closest companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, spearheaded a series of lightning conquests that astonished the world. Within decades, the once forgotten tribes of Arabia, galvanized by a shared faith and a powerful sense of purpose, shattered the decaying Byzantine and Sasanian empires. They swept through the Levant, conquering Damascus and Jerusalem, then pushed into Egypt, establishing a new capital at Fustat. To the east, the Sasanian Empire, weakened by internal strife and centuries of war, crumbled before their advance, its vast territories absorbed into the burgeoning Islamic realm. These were not merely military victories, they were transformative events that redefined the geopolitical landscape, laying the foundations for an empire that would stretch from the Atlantic to the Indus. The astonishing speed of these conquests necessitated new forms of governance and administration. The Umayyad Caliphate, established in 661 CE with its capital in Damascus, consolidated these vast territories, moving from a tribal federation to a more centralized imperial structure. Arabic became the official language of administration, coins were minted, and a sophisticated bureaucracy emerged. Under the Umayyads, the Islamic push continued westward, across North Africa, culminating in the legendary crossing of the Strait of Gibraltar by Tariq ibn Ziyad in 711 CE. "Behind you is the sea, and before you the enemy," he is famously quoted as saying, inspiring his troops to conquer the Iberian Peninsula, establishing Al-Andalus, a vibrant Islamic civilization that would profoundly influence European culture for centuries. Yet, this expansion brought challenges. Internal dissent, fueled by ethnic tensions and theological disagreements, eventually led to the overthrow of the Umayyads in 750 CE. The Abbasid Revolution, a movement that garnered support from diverse groups dissatisfied with Umayyad rule, shifted the center of Islamic power eastward. Baghdad, the newly founded capital, became the gleaming heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, a city of unparalleled intellectual and cultural brilliance. This was the true golden age of Islam, a period of breathtaking advancements in science, philosophy, medicine, and mathematics. Scholars from across the empire, regardless of their background, flocked to Baghdad's House of Wisdom, translating and preserving the wisdom of ancient Greece, Persia, and India. They didn't merely translate, they built upon this inherited knowledge, developing algebra, pioneering surgical techniques, mapping the stars, and making groundbreaking discoveries in optics and chemistry. Architects created breathtaking mosques and palaces, poets composed verses of exquisite beauty, and artists developed intricate calligraphy and geometric patterns. While Europe languished in its dark ages, the Islamic world was a beacon of learning, a vibrant hub of innovation that would eventually reignite the intellectual curiosity of the West. But success, as always, brought new challenges, and the vastness of the Abbasid realm eventually led to its fragmentation, with powerful regional dynasties emerging, each claiming a piece of the grand Islamic legacy. The Abbasid Caliphate, despite its initial promise of unity and intellectual flourishing, began to show cracks in its foundation as early as the 9th century. The sheer size of the empire made centralized control increasingly difficult. Governors, appointed by the Caliph in Baghdad, gradually amassed their own power bases, often establishing hereditary rule and treating their provinces as personal fiefdoms. This decentralization was exacerbated by the recruitment of Turkic slave soldiers, known as Mamluks, into the Abbasid army. While initially loyal and effective, these Mamluks eventually gained immense political influence, often deposing caliphs and installing their own puppets, effectively reducing the caliph to a mere figurehead. One of the first significant breaks from Abbasid control occurred in the western reaches of the empire, in Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula. Here, a surviving Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman I, escaped the Abbasid purge and established an independent emirate in 756, founding the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba. This caliphate would go on to rival Baghdad in its cultural and intellectual achievements, creating a vibrant multi-religious society where Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisted and contributed to a flourishing intellectual scene. Cordoba became a center of learning, boasting magnificent libraries, advanced medical practices, and architectural marvels like the Mezquita. This independent Western Islamic world, geographically distant and culturally distinct, marked a significant divergence from the Abbasid heartland. Further east, other dynasties began to assert their independence. In North Africa, the Aghlabids, initially Abbasid governors, established a de facto independent emirate in Ifriqiya, modern Tunisia and parts of Algeria, in the early 9th century. They became a formidable naval power, conquering Sicily and parts of southern Italy, further expanding the reach of Islamic influence. Their rule, though technically under Abbasid suzerainty, operated with considerable autonomy. Then came the Fatimids, a Shiite dynasty claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima. They rose in the early 10th century, conquering North Africa and then Egypt, where they founded Cairo and established a rival caliphate in 909. The Fatimid Caliphate, with its distinct Shiite ideology, directly challenged the Sunni Abbasids, creating a profound religious and political schism within the Islamic world. Their focus on trade and intellectual pursuits made Cairo a new center of power and learning, boasting institutions like the Al-Azhar University. In Persia, the Buyids, a Daylamite Shiite dynasty, emerged in the mid-10th century. They conquered Baghdad itself in 945, effectively reducing the Abbasid Caliph to a ceremonial role, while exercising true political and military power. This period is often referred to as the Buyid Interregnum, a time when the Abbasid Caliphate existed in name only, stripped of its authority. The Buyids, while Shiite, maintained the Abbasid Caliph for legitimacy, demonstrating the enduring symbolic power of the Caliphate even in its weakened state. Their rule fostered a rich Persian cultural revival, with significant advancements in literature and science. Later, the Seljuk Turks, a Sunni Turkic dynasty, swept into the Islamic world from Central Asia in the 11th century. They defeated the Buyids, and in 1055 they entered Baghdad, restoring Sunni authority and effectively becoming the new protectors of the Abbasid Caliph. While they restored Sunni power, they did not restore the Caliph's political authority. Instead, they established their own vast empire, stretching from Anatolia to Central Asia, under the title of Sultan, a new secular ruler who wielded temporal power while the Caliph remained the spiritual head. This division between spiritual and temporal authority would have lasting implications for the political structure of the Islamic world. These emergent dynasties, the Umayyads of Cordoba, the Fatimids of Egypt, the Buyids of Persia, and the Seljuks, each carved out their own empires, fostering distinct cultural identities and often engaging in rivalries and wars. Despite this political fragmentation, the Islamic world remained remarkably interconnected through trade routes, shared language, Arabic as the language of scholarship, and the unifying force of Islam itself. Scholars and merchants continued to travel across these diverse lands, exchanging ideas and goods, ensuring that the intellectual and artistic achievements of one region could inspire and influence others. The fragmentation, while politically disruptive, also led to a blossoming of diverse regional cultures and intellectual centers, each contributing to the rich tapestry of Islamic civilization. It was a period of both intense political struggle and unprecedented cultural flourishing, laying the groundwork for the future evolution of Islamic societies. The once magnificent courts of Baghdad, where scholars translated Aristotle and astronomers mapped the stars, found themselves splintering under the weight of internal rivalry, dynastic betrayal, and administrative collapse during the 13th century. What had once been the intellectual and political center of civilization, the Abbasid Caliphate, now saw its authority eroded, its grand vision of unity fractured into a multitude of competing warlords, fighting over the ruins of something truly magnificent. The Seljuk Sultanate, which had sought to restore order and protect the Caliph, itself began to fray, its expansive territories devolving into smaller, often squabbling regional powers. It was a period where an entire civilizational identity, built on centuries of shared knowledge and governance, was slowly, painfully coming undone. Then the true catastrophe arrived, a trauma that would forever scar the medieval Islamic world, the Mongol invasion. In 1258, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, descended upon Baghdad, laying siege to the city that had for so long been the heart of Islamic learning and power. When the walls finally fell, the ensuing destruction was visceral and absolute. The Tigris River, it is said, ran black with the ink from countless books and manuscripts thrown from the destroyed libraries, and red with the blood of scholars, poets, and ordinary citizens. It was an annihilation of an entire intellectual tradition. Centuries of accumulated wisdom turned to ash and drowned in the river. Estimates of the dead are not mere cold numbers. They represent entire neighborhoods silenced, families erased from existence, generations of knowledge extinguished in a single brutal act. The Mongol destruction was not just a military victory, it was a civilizational wound so profound that the Islamic world would spend generations, indeed centuries, trying to recover from its devastating impact. Westward, across the Anatolian plateau, a rugged land of high plains and formidable mountains, a different kind of fragmentation was underway. In the late 13th century, Anatolia was a fractured patchwork of small Turkish principalities, known as beyliks, each one a tiny island of power amidst a sea of uncertainty. On its western edge, the ancient and exhausted Byzantine Empire clung precariously to its shrinking borders, a ghost of its former glory. The Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, once a formidable power in the region, had been utterly humbled, reduced to a vassal state of the Mongol Ilkhanate, its authority hollowed out and its influence waning. Into this landscape of broken empires and desperate men, a new kind of warrior emerged, the Ghazi. These frontier fighters, often driven by religious zeal, existed on the very edge of civilization, raiding and surviving, but also dreaming of something greater, of carving out a new order from the chaos. This era was a global crucible, a time when 3 continents simultaneously experienced profound upheaval. In Europe, the last vestiges of the Crusader states were collapsing, the final Christian footholds in the Holy Land about to be extinguished. In Central Asia, the vast Mongol Empire, which had inflicted such devastation, was itself fracturing into a multitude of competing khanates, its immense power decentralizing and turning inward. Meanwhile, in North Africa, the Mamluks of Egypt stood as the sole Muslim power strong enough to have decisively defeated the Mongols in open battle. Yet they remained isolated and overstretched, unable to fill the immense power vacuum left by the collapse of the Eastern Caliphates. The medieval world was undergoing a profound civilizational reset, a violent reordering of its political and social structures. History itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what new order would emerge from the ashes of the old. Within this maelstrom of collapsing empires and desperate struggles, a narrative bridge begins to form, focusing on a specific location and a particular family. Our gaze turns to a small tribal group, camped near the Byzantine frontier in Anatolia, led by a man named Ertugrul. From this humble leader emerges his son, a young warrior named Osman. While the old world burned and empires crumbled into dust, in a forgotten corner of Asia Minor, on a rugged steppe where campfires flickered against the vast, indifferent night sky, a young man with a dream was about to change the course of history forever. Osman's story truly begins not with a grand declaration or a mighty conquest, but with a dream. This wasn't just any dream, it was a prophetic vision, a common motif in the founding myths of many great empires, yet uniquely potent in the context of a nascent Islamic state. He dreamt of a tree growing from his navel, its branches spreading wide and green, covering the entire world. From its roots sprang 4 rivers, Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, and Danube, and from its leaves emerged great cities and monuments. The wind rustled through its foliage, carrying the sounds of prayer from minarets across vast lands, and the crescent moon, a powerful symbol of Islam, shone brightly from its apex. This dream, recounted to the learned Sheikh Edebali, Osman's father-in-law and spiritual guide, was interpreted as a divine promise of future glory, a sign that his lineage was destined to establish a lasting empire that would embody the tenets of Islam and spread its light across the world. This dream was more than a mere prophecy, it was a foundational narrative, a legitimizing myth that imbued Osman's nascent state with a sacred purpose. It distinguished his ambitions from those of mere warlords or opportunistic raiders. This wasn't about personal gain or territorial acquisition for its own sake. It was about fulfilling a divinely ordained mission. The imagery of the tree, deeply rooted and expansive, suggested organic growth, resilience, and a natural order to his future dominion. The 4 rivers, representing vital sources of life and civilization, hinted at control over fertile lands and established trade routes, suggesting economic prosperity alongside spiritual guidance. The sounds of prayer emanating from countless minarets underscored the religious dimension of his enterprise, positioning him as a protector and propagator of the faith. The strategic location of Osman's encampment near the Byzantine frontier was no accident. It was a crucible of opportunity and challenge. Anatolia, a land rich in history and contention, had been a battleground for centuries. The Seljuks, who had once dominated the region, were now in decline, their sultanate fractured and weakened by internal strife and the Mongol invasions. The Mamluks in Egypt and Syria, while powerful, were focused on defending against the Crusaders and the Ilkhanate, leaving a power vacuum in western Anatolia. The Byzantine Empire, once a formidable bulwark of Christianity, was a shadow of its former self, its borders porous, its armies depleted, and its central authority increasingly tenuous. Its grip on its Anatolian territories was slipping, leaving a patchwork of independent or semi-independent principalities, known as beyliks, in its wake. This fragmented political landscape, coupled with the constant flux of raiding and skirmishing along the frontier, created an environment ripe for the emergence of a new power. Varghzis, frontier warriors, driven by a combination of religious fervor and a desire for plunder and land, were a constant feature of this borderland. Osman, himself a Ghazi leader, understood the dynamics of this environment intimately. He was not merely a tribal chief, he was a master of adaptation and alliance building. He attracted other Ghazis, adventurers, and even dispossessed Byzantine peasants and soldiers, offering them purpose, spoils, and a new identity within his growing community. His appeal lay not just in his martial prowess, but in his charisma and his ability to articulate a compelling vision for the future, one that transcended mere tribal loyalties. The Byzantine Empire, despite its weakened state, still possessed formidable fortifications and a historical legacy that commanded respect, even if grudgingly. Osman's early campaigns were not about direct confrontation with the Byzantine heartland, but rather a slow, methodical expansion into their periphery. He targeted isolated castles, strategic passes, and fertile valleys, gradually encircling key Byzantine towns. These early victories, often achieved through cunning and siegecraft rather than overwhelming force, were crucial. Each success brought new followers, new resources, and increased legitimacy. It demonstrated his capability and reinforced the belief that his dream was indeed unfolding. His first significant conquest, the capture of Karakohisar in 1288, marked a turning point. It provided him with a permanent base, a stronghold from which to launch further campaigns. More importantly, it allowed him to establish rudimentary administrative structures, including a mosque and a qadi, a judge, thereby laying the groundwork for a more formalized state apparatus. This wasn't just about taking territory, it was about governing it, about integrating new populations, and about establishing a system of justice rooted in Islamic principles. This transition from a nomadic tribal leader to a settled ruler, however modest, was a critical step in the evolution of his domain. The establishment of a mint, though symbolic at first, further solidified his authority, asserting his independence and the economic viability of his burgeoning realm. The religious dimension of Osman's leadership was paramount. He presented himself not just as a conqueror, but as a protector of the faith, a champion of Islam in a land where its presence had often been contested. This resonated deeply with the Ghazis and other Muslim populations in Anatolia, many of whom felt abandoned by the declining Seljuk Sultanate. His commitment to Islamic law and justice, even in these early stages, provided a moral compass for his actions and attracted scholars, Sufi mystics, and religious figures to his court. These individuals, like Sheikh Edebali, provided spiritual guidance, intellectual legitimacy, and a moral framework that distinguished Osman's enterprise from mere banditry. They helped to articulate the grander vision, connecting the immediate struggles of the Ghazis to the broader narrative of Islamic history and destiny. The nascent Ottoman state, therefore, was not merely a product of military might, but also of ideological conviction, strategic acumen, and a profound understanding of the political and social currents of its time. Osman's dream, interpreted and propagated by his spiritual advisors, provided the unifying narrative, the sacred purpose that propelled his small tribal group from obscurity to the threshold of empire. It was a vision that promised not just conquest, but order, justice, and the spread of a divinely sanctioned civilization. The flickering campfires on the Anatolian steppe were indeed illuminating a new path, a new trajectory for the medieval world, guided by the dream of a young warrior named Osman. The flickering light of a single oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of Sheikh Edeb Ali's humble dwelling, where Osman, a young Turkic chieftain, lay in a deep slumber. His breath was even, but within his mind, a vision of profound significance began to unfold. He dreamt of a magnificent tree, not just any tree, but one that sprouted directly from his own navel, its trunk thick and strong, its roots plunging deep into the earth, drawing sustenance from the mightiest rivers flowing across the world. Higher and higher it grew, its branches reaching outward, unfurling like vast green wings, until they overshadowed entire continents. Beneath its verdant canopy, cities twinkled like scattered jewels, their minarets and church spires piercing the soft twilight. From the valleys and plains, human voices rose in a harmonious chorus, a symphony of diverse tongues and creeds, all living in peace under the protective shade of this colossal tree. The leaves of this tree, Osman observed, were shaped like swords, yet they rustled with a gentle, benevolent breeze. Then, as quickly as it began, the dream faded, leaving Osman with a sense of awe and an indelible impression of destiny. This was no mere night vision. It was a divine sanction, a prophecy whispered into the soul of a warrior, promising not just dominion, but a sacred trust, an empire that would embody justice and shelter the world. This dream, recounted and elaborated through generations, became the spiritual bedrock of the Ottoman Empire, transforming a tribal ambition into a cosmic imperative. The question that echoed through the minds of those who heard it, and now echoes through time, is what primal force, what unyielding will, could turn such a dream into a tangible empire? Osman Ghazi, born into a world convulsed by the Mongol cataclysm around 1258, the very year Baghdad's libraries burned, was not a man of abstract philosophy, but of sharp intellect and brutal pragmatism. He inherited the leadership of the Kai tribe from his father Ertugrul, a seasoned frontier warrior, but Osman possessed a unique genius for nascent statecraft. His initial domain was a modest one, a small beylik nestled in the chaotic borderlands between the declining Byzantine Empire and the fragmented Seljuk Sultanate. Yet he saw not just chaos, but opportunity. Osman understood that the fierce Ghazi spirit, the restless energy of warriors dedicated to expanding the frontiers of Islam, could be harnessed and directed towards something more enduring than mere raiding. He forged alliances through strategic marriages, bringing together disparate Turkic clans under his banner, and cultivated a fierce personal loyalty among his followers. He offered them not just the spoils of war, but a shared purpose, a vision of a new order emerging from the ashes of old empires. His charisma was such that men flocked to him, drawn by his reputation for fairness, his martial prowess, and the compelling narrative of his divine mandate. Central to Osman's burgeoning power was the concept of the Ghazi state, an ideology that transcended simple conquest. His principality positioned itself as a beacon of Islam, a bulwark against the Christian Byzantine Empire, and a refuge for those displaced by the Mongol invasions. This was not merely a convenient political slogan, it was a deeply held identity that resonated across the Muslim world. Scholars, Sufi mystics, ambitious soldiers, and even artisans, all of whom had seen their homes and livelihoods shattered by the Mongol onslaught, found in Osman's expanding domain a new hope, a place where a new civilization could be built. They brought with them knowledge, skills, and an unshakable belief in a shared destiny. Osman's court became a magnet, drawing talent and devotion, creating an intellectual and spiritual capital even before it had a formal city. This act of civilizational magnetism, the ability to inspire and integrate diverse peoples under a common cause, proved to be one of Osman's most profound and lasting legacies. He was not just building a state, he was building a movement. Osman's military campaigns were a testament to his methodical and patient strategy. He rarely sought decisive pitched battles, preferring the slow, inexorable grind of siege and blockade. His forces, often smaller than those of his Byzantine adversaries, would isolate towns and fortresses, cutting their supply lines, wearing down their defenders with relentless pressure and psychological warfare. The fall of Byzantine strongholds in northwestern Anatolia, though often attributed directly to Osman, were often the fruit of years of sustained pressure and the strategic genius he imparted to his commanders. Bursa, for instance, which would become the first Ottoman capital, eventually fell to his son Orhan, but only after a decade-long blockade initiated by Osman himself. Imagine the world of the Byzantine defenders, generations watching their civilization recede, not in a single cataclysmic defeat, but in a slow, agonizing withdrawal, inch by painful inch. The constant skirmishes, the ever-encroaching Turkic settlements, the feeling of being abandoned by Constantinople, all conspired to erode their will to resist. Osman understood this psychological warfare, turning the very slowness of his expansion into a weapon. Osman died around 1326, leaving behind a legacy that far outstripped the humble beginnings of his tribal band. From perhaps 400 tents, he had forged a principality that controlled a significant stretch of the Byzantine frontier, commanding the loyalty of thousands of warriors and settlers from across the Muslim world. He had transformed a dream into the undeniable seed of an empire. His son, Orhan, inherited not just territory but a fully formed political and religious ideology, a loyal army, and a burgeoning administrative structure. Yet, the very success of Osman's model also sowed the seeds of future complexities. The rapid expansion, the integration of diverse populations, and the growing wealth would inevitably create new pressures, new rivalries, and new temptations. The question that remained, as the first Ottoman Sultan passed into history, was whether a dynasty built on the prophetic dream of a single man could endure the ambitions and challenges of those who would follow, shaping a dream into a truly enduring reality. Far outstripped the humble beginnings of his tribal band. From perhaps 400 tents, he had forged a principality that controlled a significant stretch of the Byzantine frontier, commanding the loyalty of thousands of warriors and settlers from across the Muslim world. He had transformed a dream into the undeniable seed of an empire. His son Orhan inherited not just territory, but a fully formed political and religious ideology, a loyal army, and a burgeoning administrative structure. Yet, the very success of Osman's model also sowed the seeds of future complexities. The rapid expansion, the integration of diverse populations, and the growing wealth would inevitably create new pressures, new rivalries, and new temptations. The question that remained, as the first Ottoman Sultan passed into history, was whether a dynasty built on the prophetic dream of a single man could endure the ambitions and challenges of those who would follow, shaping a dream into a truly enduring reality. Orhan, stepping into his father's immense shadow, understood the delicate balance required to maintain and expand this burgeoning state. He was not merely a warrior, though his military campaigns were numerous and successful, extending Ottoman control deeper into Byzantine lands and even across the Dardanelles into Europe. He was also a shrewd administrator, recognizing that conquest alone was insufficient for long-term stability. He began the systematic codification of laws, drawing upon both Islamic jurisprudence and the customary laws of the various peoples now under Ottoman dominion. This intricate legal framework, though nascent, laid the groundwork for the elaborate Ottoman legal system that would govern vast territories for centuries. Furthermore, Orhan understood the power of institutions beyond the battlefield. He established the first formal Ottoman madrasas, religious schools that served not only to train scholars and religious leaders, but also to indoctrinate a new generation into the Ottoman ethos. Blending the zealous Ghazi spirit with orthodox Islamic learning, these madrasas became centers of intellectual life, attracting scholars from across the Islamic world, further legitimizing Ottoman rule and fostering a sense of shared identity among the diverse populace. The integration of conquered populations was another critical challenge Orhan faced, and his approach was remarkably pragmatic for the era. Instead of outright oppression or forced conversion, which was common practice among many conquering powers, the Ottomans often offered a degree of religious tolerance and administrative autonomy in exchange for allegiance and tribute. Christian communities, for instance, were frequently allowed to retain their churches and practice their faith, albeit under the watchful eye of Ottoman authorities. This policy, while not without its instances of harshness, ultimately proved to be a powerful tool for stability, preventing widespread revolts and encouraging a degree of cooperation from the conquered. Byzantine nobles and officials who chose to collaborate were sometimes integrated into the Ottoman administration, their local knowledge proving invaluable. This pragmatic approach to governance, combining military might with administrative flexibility and a degree of cultural accommodation, distinguished the early Ottomans and contributed significantly to their rapid expansion. The burgeoning wealth generated by conquest and trade also brought its own set of complexities. As the Ottoman treasury grew, so too did the potential for corruption and the ambitions of powerful figures within the state. Orhan initiated measures to centralize financial control, establishing rudimentary tax collection systems and minting the first Ottoman coinage. the silver akçe. This standardization of currency and taxation was a crucial step towards creating a unified economic system, but it also meant that control over these resources became a source of power and potential contention. The rise of a distinct Ottoman elite, comprising both military commanders and religious scholars, began to solidify during Orhan's reign. These individuals, often rewarded with land grants and administrative positions, formed a new aristocracy, whose interests sometimes diverged from the central authority of the Sultan. The delicate balance between rewarding loyalty and preventing the rise of overly powerful factions would become a recurring theme in Ottoman history. Perhaps one of the most profound developments under Orhan was the formalization of the Janissary Corps, though its full evolution would take place under his successors. While Osman had relied on a tribal levy and volunteers, Orhan began to experiment with a more disciplined standing army. The initial concept of the Devshirme, the levy of Christian boys to be trained as elite soldiers and administrators, began to take shape during this period, albeit in a less formalized manner. These early Janissaries, fiercely loyal to the Sultan and highly trained, represented a revolutionary shift in military organization. They were detached from tribal loyalties, owed everything to the Sultan, and became an incredibly effective fighting force. However, this system, while providing immense military strength, also created a powerful internal force that would, in later centuries, become a source of both stability and immense political upheaval, demonstrating the double-edged sword of Ottoman institutional innovation. As Orhan's reign drew to a close, the nascent Ottoman state was no longer merely a frontier principality, but a formidable power, possessing a sophisticated military, a developing administrative apparatus, and a burgeoning sense of its own imperial destiny. The dream of Osman had been meticulously nurtured and expanded, laying the robust foundations for an empire that would reshape the geopolitical landscape for centuries to come, yet carrying within its very structure the seeds of its future trials and transformations. Where Osman had been a chieftain driven by a grand vision, Orhan, his son, became the architect who began to give that imperial ambition concrete, permanent form. He was an administrator, recognizing that true power required more than just conquest. It demanded institutions. The first Ottoman coinage, the silver akçe, began to circulate, a tangible symbol of a unified economic system and central authority. Across the nascent state, mosques and charitable foundations rose, not merely as acts of piety, but as visible markers of Ottoman presence and patronage, embedding the new power structure within the social and religious fabric of the land. A rudimentary bureaucracy started to take shape, moving beyond the ad hoc governance of a frontier-raiding state towards a more organized system capable of managing a growing dominion. Most significantly, Orhan initiated the creation of the first regular infantry units, a professional fighting force that would eventually evolve into the formidable Janissaries, fundamentally altering the nature of warfare in the region. The capture of Bursa in 1326 marked a pivotal moment, transforming it into the first true Ottoman capital. This was more than just another conquest. It was the symbolic shift from a nomadic warrior band to a settled power, a dynasty claiming a city, building walls around its dreams, and establishing a fixed center from which to project its influence. This transformation from a tribal entity to a recognizable state stands as one of history's great organizational achievements, a testament to Orhan's pragmatic genius. Orhan's relationship with the decaying Byzantine Empire was a masterclass in exploiting weakness, evolving from straightforward military confrontation into something far more intricate and revealing. The extraordinary tale unfolded with the Byzantine pretender John VI Kantakuazanos, desperate in a civil war against his rivals, inviting Ottoman troops into Europe. This was not merely an alliance, it was an invitation for a rising power to step onto a continent it had long eyed. To solidify this audacious pact, Orhan even married Kantakuazanos's daughter, Theodora, forging a dynastic link between the vigorous, expanding Ottoman house and the ancient yet fading Byzantine imperial family. This episode brilliantly illustrates a central, recurring theme of Ottoman history. The empire's growth stemmed not solely from its own military might, but equally from its astute exploitation of others' internal conflicts, turning the weaknesses of its enemies into unparalleled opportunities for its own relentless expansion. The Byzantines, in their desperation, effectively handed the Ottomans the keys to Europe. The first permanent Ottoman foothold in Europe materialized with the seizure of Gallipoli in 1354, an event that stands as one of the most consequential moments in world history. The crossing of the Dardanelles Strait by Ottoman warriors was a cinematic moment, a narrow strip of water separating Asia from Europe, now bridged by conquest. They stepped onto a continent that would never again be the same. This audacious move sent shivers of terror across Europe. From the gilded palaces of Constantinople to the papal court in Rome and the distant kingdoms of Paris, chroniclers across the Christian world wrote with dread, often interpreting the arrival of the Turks as a divine punishment for their sins, a scourge from God. This was a geopolitical earthquake. A new and formidable power had entered Europe, and it was clear even then that it had no intention of leaving. With the stage set by Orhan, his successor Murad III embarked upon a systematic conquest of the Balkans, initiating one of the most dramatic and consequential military campaigns of the medieval period. Under Murad's relentless leadership, the Ottomans defeated the Bulgarians, crushing their resistance and absorbing their lands. They then moved to subjugate the Serbs, whose once formidable kingdom began to crumble before the Ottoman advance. Murad solidified this expansion by establishing his capital at Adrianople, known as Edirne, strategically deep inside European territory, a bold declaration of permanent presence. The emotional and symbolic centerpiece of this chapter, and indeed of Murad's reign, arrived with the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. On that fateful field, Murad's Ottoman army confronted a grand coalition of Balkan Christian forces, led by the valiant Serbian Prince Lazar. The battle unfolded on a cinematic scale, two civilizations clashing amidst a field of mud and blood, the fate of the Balkans, and indeed much of southeastern Europe, hanging precariously in the balance. The Battle of Kosovo, however, was not just a military victory. It was etched into history by one of its most dramatic royal deaths. Murad I, the architect of so much Ottoman expansion, was assassinated on the battlefield. The accounts vary, but the most enduring legend tells of a Serbian nobleman, Milos Obilic, feigning surrender. Brought before the victorious sultan, he plunged a hidden dagger into Murad, an act of suicidal heroism that would resonate in Serbian epic poetry for centuries, celebrating a solitary defiance against overwhelming power. Despite the loss of their sultan, the Ottomans ultimately won the battle. Yet, the sudden vacuum of power created an immediate crisis. Murad's son, Bayezid I, wasted no time. To secure his succession and prevent any challenge to his authority, he immediately ordered the execution of his own brother, a brutal act that would tragically become an established, albeit controversial tradition within the Ottoman dynasty. This moment introduced the chilling theme of dynastic violence, a dark undercurrent that would haunt the empire throughout its long history. The very mechanisms of Ottoman power, designed for strength and expansion, contained within them the terrible seeds of its own cruelest practices, a testament to the harsh realities of empire building. Hulning surrender. Brought before the victorious sultan, he plunged a hidden dagger into Murad, an act of suicidal heroism that would resonate in Serbian epic poetry for centuries, celebrating a solitary defiance against overwhelming power. Despite the loss of their sultan, the Ottomans ultimately won the battle, yet the sudden vacuum of power created an immediate crisis. Murad's son, Bayezid I, wasted no time. To secure his succession and prevent any challenge to his authority, he immediately ordered the execution of his own brother, a brutal act that would tragically become an established, albeit controversial tradition within the Ottoman dynasty. This moment introduced the chilling theme of dynastic violence, a dark undercurrent that would haunt the empire throughout its long history. The very mechanisms of Ottoman power, designed for strength and expansion, contained within them the terrible seeds of its own cruelest practices, a testament to the harsh realities of empire building. The Ottoman Empire, having established its foothold in Anatolia and begun its expansion into Europe, faced a constant need for a disciplined and loyal fighting force. The early Ghazi warriors, while fervent, lacked the centralized control and rigorous training required for a truly imperial army. From this necessity arose one of the most distinctive and formidable institutions of the Ottoman state, the Janissaries, an elite infantry corps whose very existence was predicated on a system known as devshirme. This practice, often translated as child levy or blood tax, involved the systematic collection of Christian boys from conquered territories, primarily in the Balkans. It was a deeply controversial and often brutal policy, yet from the Ottoman perspective, it was an ingenious solution to several strategic problems. The Devshirme system was not without precedent in the broader Islamic world, where various Mamluk or slave soldier systems had been employed for centuries. However, the Ottoman application of Devshirme was unique in its scale, its institutionalization, and its profound impact on the structure of the empire. Officials, often accompanied by Janissary guards, would periodically visit Christian villages, selecting the strongest and most intelligent boys, typically between the ages of 8 and 18. These boys were then forcibly removed from their families, their homes, and their cultural heritage. The trauma of this separation cannot be overstated, and it is a recurring theme in the historical accounts and folk memories of the affected communities. Once collected, these young recruits underwent a process of intense Turkification and Islamization. They were circumcised, given Muslim names, and taught Turkish. They were deliberately cut off from their past lives, their families, and any potential loyalties outside the Sultan. This isolation was crucial to their indoctrination. They were housed in special schools and barracks, where they received rigorous physical and military training, alongside instruction in Islamic theology, calligraphy, and Ottoman court etiquette. The goal was to forge them into utterly devoted servants of the Sultan, with no familial or tribal allegiances that could conflict with their loyalty to the state. They were, in essence, slaves of the Sultan, but a privileged and powerful kind of slave, destined for high office or military glory. Not all Devshirme recruits became Janissaries. The most promising and intelligent boys were often channeled into the Enderun School, a palace school within the Topkapi Palace itself. Here they received an even more extensive education, preparing them for careers in the imperial administration as governors, viziers, or even grand viziers, the highest office in the empire after the Sultan himself. These individuals, known as kul or slaves of the gate, formed the backbone of the Ottoman bureaucracy, often wielding immense power and influence. Their advancement was based entirely on merit and their loyalty to the Sultan, ensuring that the state was run by individuals whose primary allegiance was to the central authority rather than to hereditary landowning families or regional power blocks. This created a powerful counterweight to the traditional aristocracy and religious establishment, preventing the emergence of rival power centers. The Janissaries themselves were the elite infantry, famed for their discipline, their distinctive uniforms, and their advanced weaponry. They were among the first standing armies in Europe to regularly employ firearms, adopting arquebuses and later muskets with devastating effectiveness. Their training was relentless, focusing on close-quarters combat, siege warfare, and unwavering obedience. They lived in barracks, forbidden from marrying or owning land in the early period of their existence, further reinforcing their separation from civilian life and their absolute dedication to the military. Their unique status, their direct link to the Sultan, and their formidable martial prowess made them a force to be reckoned with, both on the battlefield and, eventually, within the political landscape of the empire. Their very presence instilled fear and respect, and their victories were instrumental in the Ottoman expansion into the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. They were the cutting edge of Ottoman power, a testament to the empire's ability to innovate and adapt its military structures to achieve its strategic ambitions. The Janissaries, however, would also become a source of internal strife, their power growing to such an extent that they would at times challenge the very sultans they were sworn to serve, adding another layer of complexity to the intricate dance of power within the Ottoman state. Their origins in the Devshirme system, a forced assimilation designed to create ultimate loyalty, ironically laid the groundwork for future rebellions and political instability, demonstrating how even the most effective solutions can carry unforeseen consequences over the long arc of history. The very institution that guaranteed the Sultan's power would, in later centuries, become a threat to it, a testament to the mutable nature of power and loyalty within a vast and complex empire. Bayezid I was a man forged in the crucible of war, his very nickname, Yildirim, or the Thunderbolt, a testament to the terrifying speed and decisive force with which he moved his armies across vast distances. He was a sultan of profound contradictions, a devout Muslim who reveled in the pleasures of wine and extravagant luxury, a military genius whose tactical brilliance was matched only by his occasional recklessness and overconfidence. He expanded the Ottoman Empire at a pace previously unimaginable, pushing its borders further than any predecessor. Yet in his relentless drive for conquest, he simultaneously alienated former allies and created bitter enemies on every front. He burst onto the historical stage not as a hesitant successor, but as a man already in motion, giving orders and planning campaigns even as his father Murad I lay dead on the field of Kosovo. He seemed incapable of conceiving a world at peace. His reign was a whirlwind of conquest, stretching the Ottoman reach deep into both Anatolia and the Balkans. In Europe, Bayezid relentlessly pursued the complete encirclement of Constantinople, the ancient beleaguered capital of the Byzantine Empire, which had for so long stood as an inconvenient, if diminished, symbol of Christian resistance. The city's formidable triple walls became the focal point of a grueling, intermittent siege that stretched for years. From the ramparts, the Byzantine emperor watched helplessly as Ottoman forces tightened their noose, their banners fluttering ever closer to the Golden Gate, while desperate pleas for aid sent to the distant courts of Europe met with little more than empty promises and half-hearted gestures. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, Bayezid moved with equal ferocity, systematically crushing the independent Turkish principalities that had once been Ottoman allies or rivals. He absorbed their lands directly into the growing Ottoman state, consolidating power but also sowing seeds of deep resentment among the dispossessed rulers and their loyal followers, a decision that would ultimately return to haunt him with devastating force. The climax of Bayezid's early European campaigns arrived in 1396 with the Crusade of Nicopolis, a monumental clash that pitted the flower of European chivalry against the disciplined might of the Ottoman war machine. This was more than just a battle. It was a collision of two vastly different worlds and military philosophies, a grand European coalition, primarily French and Hungarian knights, brimming with crusading zeal and an almost suicidal overconfidence, marched eastward, intent on expelling the Ottomans from the Balkans and breaking the siege of Constantinople. They were well equipped, boasting the finest armor and weaponry of the age, but their tactical understanding of their enemy was fatally flawed. At Nicopolis, on the banks of the mighty Danube, Bayezid's forces met them with a strategic brilliance and overwhelming discipline that shattered their ranks. The resulting carnage was horrific. Thousands of European knights were captured, and in an act of brutal reprisal that sent shockwaves across Christendom, Bayezid ordered the mass execution of most of the prisoners. The victory at Nicopolis marked the absolute zenith of Bayezid's power, cementing his reputation as an invincible conqueror, a force of nature seemingly destined to fulfill the Ottoman dream of a universal Islamic empire. Yet, even as Bayezid stood at the pinnacle of his glory, an even greater storm was gathering on the eastern horizon, one that would sweep away his ambitions and plunge the Ottoman realm into an unprecedented crisis. This storm bore the name Timur, or Tamerlane, a Central Asian conqueror who had emerged from the steppes to recreate the terrifying legacy of the Mongol Empire. Timur was perhaps the most formidable military figure of his age, a man whose conquests spanned from India to Syria, whose armies were legendary for their speed and ferocity, and whose calculated brutality included the construction of pyramids of skulls outside conquered cities, not as acts of madness but as chilling messages of absolute dominance. The stage was set for an inevitable confrontation, a titanic struggle between two titans, two men who believed themselves destined to rule the known world. Bayezid, the thunderbolt of the West, and Timur, the Iron Prince of the East, began a dangerous game of diplomatic maneuvering and military posturing, their forces converging on the Anatolian heartland. The Battle of Ankara, when it finally erupted in 1402, was not merely a military engagement, it was a clash of empires, a moment when the entire Ottoman project, built on generations of conquest and careful administration, hung precariously by a single fraying thread. The Battle of Ankara proved to be an unmitigated disaster for the Ottomans. Timur, a master of strategy and deception, outmaneuvered Bayezid at every turn, his forces, bolstered by the disaffected Anatolian Turkish contingents, who had been alienated by Bayezid's earlier conquests, surrounded and utterly crushed the Ottoman army. In the ensuing chaos, Bayezid himself was captured, a humiliation unprecedented in Ottoman history. He became the first and only Ottoman sultan to fall alive into enemy hands. The legends surrounding his captivity are numerous and often apocryphal, including the humiliating tale that Timur used him as a footstool. But regardless of their veracity, the psychological devastation for a man who had proudly proclaimed himself the shadow of God on earth must have been absolute. Bayezid, the once invincible thunderbolt, died in captivity mere months after his defeat, a broken man. His empire, which had seemed so robust and unstoppable just years before, immediately imploded into a brutal civil war as his sons, each with their own claims and ambitions, turned their swords against one another. The chaos of this interregnum, known as the Ottoman interregnum, raised a chilling question. Had the Ottoman Empire, after its meteoric rise, already reached its premature end before it had even truly begun to fulfill its grand destiny? This period, lasting from 1402 to 1413, was a brutal power struggle among Bayezid I's sons, Süleyman Çelebi, İsa Çelebi, Musa Çelebi, and Mehmed Çelebi. Each brother carved out a sphere of influence, engaging in a relentless series of betrayals, alliances, and battles that tore the nascent empire apart. Süleyman, initially controlling the European territories from Edirne, attempted to secure his position by making treaties with the Byzantines and Venice, even ceding some Ottoman gains in the Balkans to buy their neutrality or support. Meanwhile, Isa struggled to maintain control in Anatolia, his authority constantly challenged by local beyliks that had been re-established by Timur, and by the ambitions of his brothers. Musa, after being released by Timur, emerged as a formidable contender, first challenging Isa and then Süleyman. He proved to be a particularly aggressive and cunning leader, capturing Süleyman and executing him in 1411. Musa then turned his attention to the remaining brother, Mehmed. The conflict between Musa and Mehmed became the defining struggle of the interregnum. Musa, now controlling much of the European territories, adopted a more confrontational stance against Christian powers, attempting to reassert Ottoman dominance in the Balkans, which ironically alienated some of the very forces that could have aided him against Mehmed. His harsh rule and his attempts to curb the power of the landed aristocracy also led to dissent within his own ranks. Mehmed, operating from Amasya in Anatolia, meticulously built his support base, skillfully navigating the complex political landscape. He understood the need for stability and gradually consolidated his power, gaining the loyalty of various tribal leaders and military commanders. He even sought the assistance of the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos, a testament to the desperate state of affairs within the Ottoman realm. The final confrontation between Musa and Mehmed took place near Çamurlu in 1413. Mehmed, with superior strategy and the support of disgruntled elements from Musa's own forces, emerged victorious. Musa was killed, bringing an end to the 11-year-long civil war. Mehmed Çelebi, now Sultan Mehmed I, faced the daunting task of reunifying a shattered empire. The interregnum had not only witnessed immense internal conflict, but also the resurgence of numerous Anatolian beyliks, which had seized the opportunity to reclaim their independence from Ottoman rule. Karaman, Gurmian, Aydın, Saruhan, Menteşe, and Tekke, among others, had all reasserted their sovereignty, effectively reversing many of Bayezid's conquests. In the Balkans, some territories had been lost, and the loyalty of remaining vassals was tenuous at best. The once formidable Janissary Corps, the elite infantry of the Ottoman army, had been fractured and demoralized by fighting for different claimants. Mehmed I, often referred to as the Restorer, or the founder of the Second Ottoman Empire, embarked on a rigorous campaign to consolidate his authority and rebuild the state. He understood that immediate military confrontation with all the re-emerged beyliks simultaneously would be counterproductive and potentially disastrous. Instead, he adopted a more pragmatic and diplomatic approach, combining military pressure with strategic alliances, marriages, and even outright bribery to gradually bring the Anatolian territories back under Ottoman control. He focused on re-establishing central authority, reorganizing the army, and restoring the administrative structures that had decayed during the civil war. One of his most significant challenges was the Dervish revolt led by Sheikh Bedreddin. Bedreddin, a highly educated and influential scholar and mystic, had served as Musa Çelebi's chief military judge during the interregnum. His rebellion, which erupted in 1416, was not merely a political uprising but also held strong social and religious undertones. Bedreddin preached a doctrine of communal property and equality, attracting a large following among peasants, dervishes, and disaffected elements of society who had suffered greatly during the civil war. His movement represented a deep-seated desire for social justice and challenged both the temporal authority of the Sultan and the established religious hierarchy. The revolt spread rapidly through various parts of the empire, particularly in the Aegean region and Rumelia, posing a serious threat to Mehmed's nascent authority. The Ottoman state, still fragile from the interregnum, had to exert considerable effort to suppress this widespread and popular uprising. Mehmed's forces, led by his son Murad, eventually crushed the rebellion, executing Bedreddin and his main followers. The suppression of this revolt demonstrated the Sultan's resolve and the re-emerging strength of the Ottoman state, signaling that the era of internal fragmentation was drawing to a close. Mehmed I also turned his attention to the empire's external relations. He maintained a policy of peace with the Byzantine Empire, recognizing the need for stability on his western flank while he dealt with internal consolidation. He also sought to reassure European powers that the Ottoman threat had not fully dissipated, but was under control, preventing any large-scale crusader expeditions that might further destabilize his realm. His reign, though relatively short, was crucial for the survival and eventual resurgence of the Ottoman Empire. He laid the groundwork for the future conquests and glory that would be achieved by his successors, particularly his son Murad II and his grandson Mehmed II. His prudent policies, his emphasis on internal stability, and his gradual reassertion of Ottoman power allowed the empire to heal from the wounds of the interregnum and prepare for a new era of expansion. The period of uncertainty and near collapse had passed, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and a steady rebuilding of the foundations of a powerful state that would endure for centuries. The year 1402 plunged the Ottoman realm into dismemberment, a once unified empire reduced to a battleground for Bayezid versus sons, Suleiman, Musa, Isa, and Mehmed, each with their own ambitions, ignited a decade-long fratricidal conflict, tearing at the very fabric of Ottoman society. Ottoman armies clashed, brothers slew brothers, and cities changed hands with dizzying frequency. Suleiman, initially holding European territories, found himself embroiled in constant skirmishes. Isa, attempting to carve out a domain in Anatolia, met a swift and violent end. Musa seized control of Rumelia, even attacking Constantinople, while Mehmed, the youngest and most cunning, patiently built his power base in central Anatolia. The Balkan Christian states exploited this chaos, reclaiming lost territories and momentarily breathing a sigh of relief as their formidable foe turned inward. It was a period that questioned how any empire could survive such a self-inflicted wound. Emerging from this crucible of civil war was Mehmed I, a figure often overshadowed by his more flamboyant successors, yet truly one of history's great survivors. His path from desperate fugitive, constantly evading his brother's assassins, to the triumphant sultan who reunified a shattered empire, speaks volumes of his personal qualities. Mehmed possessed uncanny patience, strategic cunning, and a remarkable ability to forge alliances, even with former enemies, when it served his ultimate goal. He inspired loyalty in his men, convincing them to fight for a cause that for years seemed utterly lost. The reunification of the empire under Mehmed I in 1413 was not merely a political victory, it was an act of political resurrection, a dynasty pronounced dead rising phoenix-like from its own ashes, a testament to the resilience of the Ottoman state and the extraordinary will of a single man. The fragile peace Mehmed I painstakingly established was then entrusted to his son Murad II, who inherited an empire still reeling from the interregnum. Murad, a complex and deeply human figure, spent his reign systematically rebuilding the military, fortifying the administration, and expanding the territorial base. He was a man who genuinely yearned for peace, a desire so profound that he twice abdicated the throne, seeking a life of quiet contemplation. Yet, the relentless demands of empire, the constant external threats, and internal pressures repeatedly dragged him back to the seat of power. His military campaigns in the Balkans, particularly his decisive victory at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448, permanently shattered European hopes of expelling the Ottomans from the peninsula. Beyond the battlefield, Murad was a significant patron of culture, fostering an environment where poets and scholars flourished, and where an Ottoman court culture, a vibrant tapestry woven from Turkish, Persian, and Byzantine traditions, began to take definite shape. During this period, the Janissaries solidified their position as a major institutional force within the Ottoman state, representing one of the most remarkable and morally complex military institutions in history. Their origins lay in the devshirme system, a practice by which the Ottoman state levied a tribute of young Christian boys from conquered territories. These boys were then converted to Islam, educated in Ottoman values, and rigorously trained to become an elite corps of soldiers and administrators. The moral complexities of this system cannot be overstated. It was undeniably a form of forced conversion and the traumatic separation of children from their families. Yet, for many of these boys, it also offered an unprecedented path to power, prestige, and social mobility, opportunities that would have been utterly unavailable in their original communities. The Janissaries, fiercely loyal and highly disciplined, armed with advanced weaponry and tactics, became the cutting edge of Ottoman military power, a symbol of their genius in institutional innovation, but also a harbinger of future internal conflicts as their power grew. As Murad II tirelessly worked to consolidate and expand his father's legacy, a young prince was growing up, destined to transform the empire forever. Mehmed II, Murad's son. Mehmed first tasted power as a teenager, briefly ascending the throne during one of his father's abdications, only to be almost immediately overwhelmed by the immense pressures of rule. He was brilliant, obsessive, and consumed by a singular ambition that had haunted Ottoman sultans for a century: the conquest of Constantinople. The chapter ends with Murad, the peace-loving father, being recalled from his attempted retirement, forced to once again don the mantle of sultan to manage a crisis his teenage son could not. The bitter irony was palpable. The man who yearned for contemplation was now preparing the ground for his son's ultimate act of war. The air was thick with anticipation, hinting at something historic, irreversible, and monumental on the horizon. The air was thick with anticipation, hinting at something historic, irreversible, and monumental on the horizon. Murad II, a sultan who yearned for contemplation and spiritual pursuits, found himself once again thrust into the tumultuous world of warfare and statecraft, a world he had repeatedly tried to escape. His son Mehmed, though brilliant, had proved too young, too impetuous, and perhaps too overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the imperial crown to navigate the treacherous currents of international diplomacy and military strategy that defined the mid-15th century. This forced return of Murad, a seasoned warrior and astute statesman, was a stark reminder of the fragile balance of power that characterized the Ottoman Empire during its formative years. The empire, though formidable, was still in a phase of rapid expansion and consolidation, constantly fending off challenges from both within its borders and from the formidable Christian powers of Europe. Murad's reluctant return to power was a testament to his unwavering sense of duty, a characteristic that would, ironically, pave the way for his son's unparalleled triumphs. He was in essence laying the groundwork, stabilizing the empire, and ensuring its internal cohesion, all critical prerequisites for the grand ambitions that simmered within Mehmed's mind. Mehmed II, even in his youth, displayed an intellect that was both profound and restless. He devoured books on history, philosophy, and military strategy, mastering multiple languages and engaging with scholars from various disciplines. His early exposure to power, however brief and challenging, had only intensified his desire to leave an indelible mark on history. The humiliation of his early abdication, the whispers of his inexperience, and the constant shadow of his father's immense legacy fueled a relentless ambition. He was not merely content with maintaining the empire, he envisioned its transformation into a truly global power, a vision that hinged on one singular, audacious goal: the conquest of Constantinople. This ancient city, the last bastion of the Byzantine Empire, had stood unconquered for over a millennium, a symbol of Christian resistance and a strategic choke point controlling trade routes between East and West. Its walls, legendary for their impregnability, had repelled countless invaders, making its capture The city of Constantinople had stood for 1100 years, a defiant sentinel on the edge of two continents, the last flickering ember of the Roman Empire. Its very existence was a challenge, a testament to an enduring legacy, and the spiritual heart of Orthodox Christianity. Its triple-layered Theodosian walls, stretching for miles, dotted with formidable towers, and protected by a deep moat, had repelled every attacker, earning it a legendary reputation as the greatest defensive fortification in the medieval world. To conquer this city was not merely a military objective, it was a statement about the nature of the world itself, a claim to imperial succession that transcended mere territorial gain. It was a prize that had eluded countless emperors and caliphs, a dream whispered in the courts of conquerors for centuries. Mehmed II, at the moment of his second accession to the throne in 1451, was no longer the impetuous youth who had briefly held power years earlier. The sting of his earlier humiliation had forged him into something harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. He was a man consumed by a singular, all-encompassing obsession, the capture of Constantinople. His preparations for the siege were meticulous, almost maniacal. He delved into military history, studying the failures of previous sieges, and recruited engineers and cannon makers from across Europe and the Muslim world. He commissioned the Hungarian engineer Urban to design a monstrous cannon, a superweapon capable of hurling stone balls weighing hundreds of kilograms, an unprecedented engine of destruction. Mehmed spent his entire waking life preparing for this one moment, willing to expend any amount of wealth, sacrifice any number of lives, and endure any hardship to make his dream a reality. The siege itself began in early April 1453. An immense Ottoman army estimated at 80,000 or more, arrayed against a desperate Byzantine garrison of perhaps 7,000 men, led by Emperor Constantine XI. From the initial Ottoman advance, the city faced an onslaught of unprecedented scale. Day after day, the colossal cannons battered the ancient walls, their thunderous roars echoing across the Sea of Marmara. Byzantine defenders, a motley crew of imperial guards, Venetian and Genoese mercenaries, and civilian volunteers, fought with a courage born of desperation. In a moment of almost surreal military audacity, Mehmed ordered his fleet, nearly 70 ships, to be dragged overland on greased logs, bypassing the massive defensive chain that blocked the Golden Horn. This audacious maneuver, executed under the cover of darkness, allowed the Ottoman navy to attack the city from a new, vulnerable flank, a feat that stunned the defenders and disheartened the populace. Inside the city, Byzantine civilians huddled in the Hagia Sophia, praying for a miracle, while on the walls, mercenary Giovanni Giustiniani fought with a ferocity that inspired those around him, and Emperor Constantine XI, a figure of tragic dignity, walked among his men, offering encouragement and preparing for the inevitable. The final assault began in the early hours of May 29, 1453. After weeks of relentless bombardment, a breach appeared in the outer walls, a gaping wound in the ancient defences. Ottoman troops, led by elite janissaries, poured through the shattered ramparts. The fighting was brutal, hand to hand, a desperate struggle in the narrow streets and crumbling fortifications. Emperor Constantine XI, refusing capture or retreat, died fighting in the final defence of his city, his body lost in the carnage, never definitively identified. As dawn broke, the Ottoman banners flew over the city. Mehmed II, the young conqueror, rode triumphantly into Constantinople. He dismounted before the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, picked up a handful of earth, and poured it over his head in a gesture of profound humility before God. Then he entered the basilica, and with a single command, ordered its conversion into a mosque. Across Europe, chroniclers wrote of the event as the end of the world, a cataclysmic blow to Christendom. In the Muslim world, it was celebrated as the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, the ultimate triumph of Islam. In the immediate aftermath, Mehmed, rather than merely plundering the city, revealed a grander vision. He immediately set about rebuilding and repopulating Constantinople, renaming it Istanbul. He issued decrees inviting Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and even Europeans to settle in the city, offering land, tax exemptions, and religious freedom. This policy laid the foundation for the cosmopolitan model of Ottoman governance that would define the empire for centuries. While the Hagia Sophia's conversion into a mosque was a powerful symbol of conquest, Mehmed also protected the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, appointing a new patriarch and guaranteeing the rights of the Christian community. This pragmatic tolerance, a hallmark of Ottoman rule, demonstrated Mehmed's understanding that a thriving empire required not just conquest, but also stability and a diverse, productive populace. The fall of Constantinople, therefore, did not end civilization as many Europeans feared. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new one, a vibrant, multi-ethnic, and religiously diverse imperial capital. The young sultan, having achieved what his ancestors had dreamed of for a century, was already looking toward his next conquest. The vast panorama of Europe now laid open before him. Mehmed's vision extended far beyond the walls of Constantinople. He saw himself as the rightful heir to both the Roman and Islamic empires, a notion reflected in his self-proclaimed title, Kaiser-i-Rum, or Caesar of Rome. This ambition propelled him into a relentless campaign of expansion, consolidating Ottoman power in Anatolia and the Balkans. He systematically dismantled the remaining Byzantine strongholds, such as the Despotate of Morea and the Empire of Trebizond, extinguishing the last embers of Roman continuity. His military campaigns were characterized by meticulous planning, innovative siege tactics, and an unwavering determination. For instance, his siege of Belgrade in 1456, though ultimately unsuccessful, showcased the formidable power of the Ottoman artillery and the logistical prowess required to sustain such a large-scale operation. This constant pressure on Christian Europe sent shivers down the spine of Western monarchs, who saw the Ottoman Empire as an existential threat. Often referred to as the Scourge of God, beyond military might, Mehmed II was a sophisticated patron of the arts and sciences, transforming Constantinople into a center of learning and culture. He commissioned the construction of numerous mosques, bridges, bazaars, and public baths, revitalizing the city's infrastructure and economy. The Fatih Mosque complex, built on the site of the former Church of the Holy Apostles, became a sprawling educational and religious institution, housing madrasas, a library, and a hospital. He invited scholars, artists, and architects from across the Islamic world, and even from Italy, fostering an intellectual environment that blended Eastern and Western traditions. His personal library contained works in Arabic, Persian, Greek, and Latin, reflecting his broad intellectual interests. He was fluent in several languages and engaged in philosophical discussions with prominent thinkers of his time, demonstrating a remarkable intellectual curiosity for a ruler of his era. This cultural flourishing under Mehmed's patronage solidified Constantinople's role as a major cultural and intellectual hub, rivaling even the great cities of Renaissance Europe. Mehmed's administrative reforms were equally impactful. He codified Ottoman law, creating the Kanun-Naimi Ali Osman, a comprehensive legal code that regulated everything from taxation and land ownership to criminal justice. This legal framework provided a stable and predictable governance structure, essential for the efficient operation of a vast and diverse empire. He also centralized the bureaucracy, strengthening the power of the Sultan and reducing the influence of regional potentates. The Devshirme system, which conscripted Christian boys from the Balkans to be trained as elite Janissary soldiers and civil servants, was refined and expanded under his rule. This system, though controversial in its origins, provided a loyal and highly capable cadre of administrators and soldiers directly accountable to the Sultan and detached from traditional aristocratic power bases. These reforms laid the institutional groundwork for the Ottoman Empire's golden age, ensuring its longevity and continued expansion. However, Mehmed's reign was not without its challenges. His relentless expansionist policies often led to prolonged and costly wars. The protracted conflict with Venice over maritime trade routes and control of the Aegean Islands, for example, drained imperial resources. Despite these challenges, Mehmed's strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve allowed him to navigate these complexities, often emerging victorious, or at least securing favorable terms. His conquest of the Genoese colony of Kaffa in Crimea in 1475, for instance, secured Ottoman control over the Black Sea, a vital trade route, and further cemented his empire's dominance. Mehmed II's legacy is multifaceted and profound. He was not merely a conqueror, but a visionary statesman who reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean. He transformed a nascent empire into a powerful, centralized state, laying the foundations for its future glory. His reign marked a pivotal moment in world history, signifying the definitive end of the Byzantine Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a major world power. His policies of pragmatic tolerance, cultural patronage, and administrative reform created a truly imperial civilization, one that would endure for centuries and leave an indelible mark on the regions it governed. He was a figure of immense historical significance, a ruler whose actions reverberated across continents and generations, forever altering the course of both Islamic and European history. Mehmed II, with Constantinople now firmly in his grasp, envisioned a grander destiny, positioning himself as the rightful heir to both the Islamic Caliphate and the Roman Empire. This was a meticulously crafted political program, a sophisticated claim to universal dominion. He deliberately styled himself not only as Sultan, but also as Caesar, the Caesari Rum, Emperor of Rome, a title resonating deeply across the Mediterranean world. To underscore this audacious claim, he extended invitations to Italian humanist scholars, welcoming them to his court, and commissioned his portrait from the celebrated Venetian painter Gentile Bellini. His personal library, a testament to his expansive intellect, housed an extraordinary collection of manuscripts in Greek, Latin, and Arabic, illustrating a ruler who consciously placed himself at the crossroads of civilizations. Mehmed aspired to be not merely the greatest Muslim ruler, but the preeminent sovereign in the entire world, embodying an Ottoman cosmopolitanism that demonstrated a remarkable capacity to absorb and synthesize diverse cultural traditions into the fabric of his burgeoning empire. The ink on the conquest of Constantinople had barely dried before Mehmed's military campaigns resumed with relentless intensity. The conquest of Serbia followed, systematically bringing the region under Ottoman control, while the last vestiges of Byzantine successor states in Greece were absorbed, extinguishing their flickering lights of independence. In Anatolia, his forces moved with purpose, eliminating the remaining independent Turkish principalities, thereby consolidating Ottoman power across the peninsula. Further afield, the conquest of Crimea secured vital territories and trade routes, while a series of protracted wars with Venice saw the Ottomans establish an undeniable naval supremacy in the Aegean Sea, challenging the maritime might of the Venerable Republic. Each of these campaigns, while a strategic victory, carried with it profound human stakes, reshaping lives and landscapes. Perhaps one of the most poignant of these was the conquest of Trebizond in 1461. This city, perched on the Black Sea coast, represented the final independent successor state to the Byzantine Empire, and its fall marked the complete and final extinction of the Roman imperial tradition, a continuous lineage that had endured for an astonishing 1500 years. Beyond the battlefield, Mehmed's genius manifested in his meticulous transformation of the Ottoman state into a highly centralized imperial system. The Topkapi Palace complex, a sprawling architectural marvel, was conceived and constructed as the administrative heart of this new empire, a physical embodiment of centralized power. He undertook the monumental task of codifying Ottoman law, resulting in the Kanuni Osmani, a comprehensive legal framework that provided structure and order to his vast domains. The Devshirme system, already in place, was further refined and developed into a sophisticated meritocratic pipeline. This system meticulously identified and cultivated talented young men of humble origins, often from Christian backgrounds, who were then educated and trained to fill the highest offices of the empire, ensuring loyalty and competence within the state apparatus. However, this administrative brilliance was not without its shadows. Mehmed's legacy also includes the darker aspects of statecraft, such as his institutionalization of fratricide as a pragmatic, albeit brutal state policy to prevent dynastic civil wars. He ruthlessly suppressed any potential rivals, consolidating an autocratic system where the sultan's word was not merely law, but the very embodiment of divine authority. Even a ruler of Mehmed's power and ambition encountered limitations, and these moments of setback offer a glimpse into the human dimension of this formidable figure. The failed siege of Rhodes in 1480 stands as a testament to the formidable defences of the Knights Hospitaller and the limits of Ottoman might. Yet, his ambitions stretched even further, culminating in an audacious attempted invasion of Italy. In 1480, Ottoman forces successfully landed at Otranto in southern Italy, an event that sent shockwaves of terror across the entire Italian peninsula. Pope Sixtus IV reportedly made preparations to flee Rome, fearing the imminent arrival of the Ottoman army at the gates of the Eternal City. However, before Mehmed could fully exploit this crucial foothold, fate intervened. His sudden death in 1481 brought an abrupt end to the Italian adventure, leaving the campaign unfinished and the future of the empire uncertain. Mehmed's life was a paradox. A man of extraordinary cultural sophistication, capable of commissioning beautiful art and engaging in profound intellectual discourse, yet also capable of extraordinary cruelty and ruthless pragmatism. He was a visionary who had forged an empire that was both magnificent in its scope and deeply unstable in its internal dynamics. Mehmed's death plunged the empire into immediate crisis, initiating a fierce dynastic struggle between his two sons, Bayezid and Jem, for the coveted throne. The story of Prince Jem, defeated by his brother, is a poignant tragedy. He spent the remainder of his life as a political hostage, a pawn passed between the Knights of Rhodes, the French king, and ultimately the Pope. This Ottoman prince, once destined for greatness, lived out his days in gilded captivity within European courts, a living symbol of the limits of Ottoman power and the precariousness of royal succession. Mehmed had indeed created an empire of extraordinary power, a force that reshaped the world, but it was also an empire imbued with an inherent fragility. The question of what would come next, how this vast and complex creation would endure, was a riddle that even the greatest conqueror in the world had not been able to definitively answer. The precariousness of Mehmed's legacy was immediately apparent in the brutal succession crisis that followed his death. The Ottoman tradition of fratricide, though abhorrent to modern sensibilities, was a grim practicality designed to prevent civil war and secure the throne for a single undisputed heir. Bayezid, the elder son, was governor of Amasya, a province known for its martial tradition and strong ties to the Janissaries. Jem, the younger and perhaps more charismatic prince, held court in Konya, a region with a different power base and allegiances. The rivalry was not merely personal, it reflected deeper divisions within the Ottoman elite, between those who favoured a more conservative, Islamic law-based approach to governance and those who embraced Mehmed's more cosmopolitan and centralised vision. Jem's rebellion, fueled by promises of support from Mamluk Egypt and various Anatolian beyliks, was a desperate gamble. His initial successes were fleeting, and Bayezid, leveraging his superior organization and the loyalty of the core Ottoman military, decisively defeated him. The story of Jem's subsequent exile is a fascinating if tragic footnote in Ottoman history. He first sought refuge with the Knights Hospitaller on Rhodes, an ironic twist given his father's relentless campaigns against Christian powers. The Knights, ever opportunistic, saw him as a valuable pawn, a potential lever against the powerful Ottoman Empire. They paraded him through Europe, a living trophy, showcasing him to various monarchs and even the Pope. This nomadic existence, from Rhodes to France and then to the Papal States, was a gilded cage. Jem, a cultured and educated prince, fluent in several languages and a patron of the arts, found himself an object of curiosity and political maneuvering. Constantly under surveillance, his fate dictated by the whims of European potentates, he was a constant threat to Bayezid, a rallying point for disaffected elements within the empire, and a bargaining chip for European powers. His presence effectively tied Bayezid's hands in the West, forcing him to maintain a delicate diplomatic balance and pouring vast sums into payments to keep Jem in European custody. The constant threat of Jem's return, however remote, cast a long shadow over Bayezid's early reign, diverting resources and attention from other imperial priorities. Bayezid II, who ultimately secured the throne, was a stark contrast to his father. Where Mehmed was a relentless conqueror, Bayezid was a more cautious and devout ruler, often dubbed Bayezid the Just or Bayezid the Pious. He inherited an empire of immense power, but also one grappling with the rapid pace of expansion and the internal stresses it created. His reign saw a period of consolidation rather than aggressive expansion. He focused on internal reforms, strengthening the administration and promoting Islamic scholarship and arts. He was a patron of Sufi orders and a prolific builder of mosques, bridges, and charitable institutions. This emphasis on internal stability and religious piety was, in part, a reaction to the perceived excesses of his father's reign, which some conservative elements viewed as too secular and too focused on worldly conquest. However, Bayezid's reign was not without its military campaigns. He engaged in protracted wars with the Mamluks of Egypt and the Safavids of Persia, reflecting the ongoing geopolitical rivalries of the time. The Mamluk Wars were largely inconclusive, a series of border skirmishes and naval engagements that highlighted the limitations of Ottoman power in the eastern Mediterranean. The rise of the Safavid Empire under Shah Ismail, a fervent Shiite leader, presented a new and formidable challenge on the eastern frontier. The Safavids, with their strong religious ideology and charismatic leadership, posed not just a military threat but an ideological one, drawing support from Shiite communities within Ottoman Anatolia. This sectarian conflict would define Ottoman-Persian relations for centuries. Domestically, Bayezid faced several rebellions, most notably the Shahkulu Rebellion, a large-scale uprising of Turkmen tribes in Anatolia, instigated by Safavid agents. This rebellion underscored the enduring challenges of centralizing authority over diverse and often restive populations within the vast Ottoman domain. It revealed the continued fragility of imperial control in certain regions and the persistent influence of localized power structures and religious movements. Bayezid's reign also saw significant cultural and intellectual flourishing. Istanbul, now firmly established as the imperial capital, became a vibrant center of learning and art, attracting scholars, poets, and artists from across the Islamic world. The Topkapi Palace continued to expand, becoming a sprawling complex of administrative offices, residential quarters, and magnificent courtyards, a testament to the empire's wealth and prestige. Despite these achievements, Bayezid's more cautious approach to foreign policy and his perceived leniency towards the Safavids ultimately led to discontent among the more militarily ambitious elements of the Ottoman elite, particularly the Janissaries. They longed for the glory and spoils of conquest that had characterized Mehmed's era. This dissatisfaction would ultimately set the stage for another, even more brutal succession crisis, one that would redefine the very nature of Ottoman imperial power and usher in a new era of aggressive expansion under his son Selim I. Bayezid's reign, therefore, serves as a crucial bridge between the era of Mehmed the Conqueror and the subsequent period of Ottoman ascendancy, a time of consolidation and internal development, yet also one fraught with internal and external challenges that ultimately shaped the empire's future trajectory. Selim I, known as Yavuz the Grim, ruled with a volcanic temperament and iron will, reportedly executing 7 Grand Viziers during his mere 8 years on the throne. Yet Selim was a complex figure, composing poetry, leading armies with brutal efficiency, and possessing the strategic foresight to recognize existential threats to the Ottoman Empire. The most pressing threat came from Persia, embodied by Shah Ismail I, founder of the Safavid dynasty. Ismail united Persia under Shia Islam, actively encouraging Ottoman subjects, particularly Turkmen tribes in Anatolia, to convert and rebel. This theological dispute was deeply political, challenging Ottoman legitimacy and territorial integrity. Selim's response was extreme. He ordered the massacre of tens of thousands of suspected Shia sympathizers across Anatolia before marching eastward. The confrontation culminated in 1514 at the Battle of Chaldiran. On a sprawling battlefield, Selim's strategic brilliance and technological superiority proved decisive. His artillery and disciplined Janissary infantry shattered Ismail's cavalry-based army. The Shah fled, abandoning Tabriz to Ottoman occupation. Chaldiran solidified a crucial boundary between Ottoman and Safavid spheres of influence, a line persisting for centuries and shaping the Middle East's geopolitics today. Having secured his eastern flank, Selim turned southward, conquering the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and Syria in 1516 and 1517. Ottoman armies crossed the Taurus Mountains, routing Mamluk forces at the Battle of Majdabik, opening the path through Syria. Selim's forces pressed into Egypt, destroying the last Mamluk Sultanate. This monumental conquest transformed the Ottoman Empire into the undisputed dominant power in the Islamic world. Selim acquired the title of Caliph, becoming the spiritual leader of Sunni Islam, and gained custody of Mecca and Medina. This elevated the Ottoman Sultanate from a regional power to the guardian of the entire Sunni Muslim world. Selim's short but extraordinary reign wrought astonishing transformation. He doubled Ottoman territory, secured the eastern frontier against the Safavid threat, and eliminated Mamluk power, repositioning the Ottomans as leaders of the Islamic world. This expansion came at considerable cost: massacres in Anatolia, brutal suppression of rivals, and an atmosphere of fear. However, Selim laid the foundation for a grander era. His son Suleiman would inherit this vast, reoriented empire, building upon his father's grim legacy to forge its most glorious chapter. Suleiman's ascension in 1520 marked the dawn of the Ottoman Empire's golden era. He inherited an empire teeming with potential, its coffers full, its military sharpened, and its spiritual authority solidified. However, Suleiman was no mere inheritor. He possessed a keen intellect, a vision for justice, and an ambition to rival history's greatest conquerors. His 46-year reign saw the Ottoman Empire reach its zenith in territorial expansion, cultural flourishing, legal reform, and administrative sophistication. His early campaigns immediately signaled a departure. Suleiman looked west, towards a Europe fractured by religious upheaval. The capture of Belgrade in 1521, a vital stronghold, sent shockwaves through Christendom and opened the path into Hungary. Following Belgrade, the island of Rhodes, a bastion of the Knights Hospitaller, fell after a brutal 6-month siege in 1522. These early successes demonstrated Suleiman's military prowess and his determination to assert Ottoman dominance. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 was a watershed moment. The Ottoman army, led by Suleiman, annihilated Hungarian forces, killing King Louis II and much of his nobility. This victory dissolved the Kingdom of Hungary, paving the way for direct Ottoman administration in Central Europe. The subsequent sieges of Vienna in 1529 and 1532, though unsuccessful, demonstrated the terrifying reach of the Ottoman military, forcing the Habsburgs to divert immense resources. These campaigns were strategic maneuvers to secure borders and project power. Beyond military conquest, Suleiman was a profound legal reformer, earning him the epithet Kanuni, the lawgiver. He recognized that a vast multi-ethnic empire required a coherent and equitable legal system. He oversaw a comprehensive codification of Ottoman law, the Kanunname, integrating Islamic Sharia with secular edicts. This framework addressed taxation, land tenure, criminal justice, and the rights of religious communities, providing a clear basis for governance. His reforms aimed to eliminate corruption, ensure fair trials, and protect the peasantry, strengthening central authority and fostering order. Suleiman's reign also witnessed an unparalleled flowering of arts, architecture, and scholarship. He was a patron of poets, artists, and architects, transforming Istanbul into a dazzling imperial capital. Mimar Sinan, the chief Ottoman architect, produced iconic structures like the Süleymaniye Mosque, a masterpiece dominating Istanbul's skyline. These grand projects were physical manifestations of Ottoman power, piety, and cultural sophistication. Calligraphy, miniature painting, ceramics, and textiles reached new artistic heights under his patronage, reflecting a vibrant imperial culture. The empire became a magnet for scholars, scientists, and artisans, fostering intellectual exchange. Furthermore, Suleiman's diplomatic relations extended beyond the battlefield. He forged alliances with Protestant powers in Europe, notably France, against their common Habsburg enemy. This Franco-Ottoman alliance was a groundbreaking diplomatic maneuver, defying traditional religious boundaries and reshaping European geopolitics. It allowed the Ottomans to exert influence in Western Europe and provided France with a crucial counterweight to Habsburg dominance. These complex engagements underscore Suleiman's understanding of international relations and his ability to leverage political divisions. His naval power, under admirals like Hayreddin Barbarossa, dominated the Mediterranean, challenging European control and securing Ottoman trade routes, further cementing the empire's economic and strategic importance. The empire's expansion under Suleiman was not solely driven by military might. It was also facilitated by effective administration and a relatively tolerant approach to conquered peoples. While conversion to Islam was encouraged, it was not forcibly imposed. Non-Muslim communities, Christians and Jews, were granted protected status as dhimmis, allowed to practice their religions and manage internal affairs under the millet system, albeit with restrictions and a special tax. This policy, often contrasting favorably with religious persecution in contemporary Europe, contributed to the stability and longevity of the multi-ethnic empire. Economic prosperity, fueled by control over vast trade routes including the Silk Road and maritime links to India and Africa, further enriched the imperial coffers and supported state projects. Suleiman's reign represents the culmination of centuries of Ottoman development. He inherited a formidable state, but through his strategic genius, legal reforms, cultural patronage, and shrewd diplomacy, he transformed it into a global superpower. He solidified its borders, established a comprehensive legal framework, presided over an artistic and intellectual renaissance, and projected Ottoman power across 3 continents. His legacy was an empire that was militarily dominant, culturally rich, administratively sophisticated, and economically prosperous. The foundations laid by his predecessors, particularly Selim, had prepared the ground, but Suleiman's vision and leadership brought the Ottoman Empire to its unparalleled zenith, leaving an indelible mark on both Islamic and world history. The challenges that would eventually lead to its decline were still centuries away, hidden behind the shimmering brilliance of this golden age. Europeans knew him as Suleiman the Magnificent, a title evoking the splendor of his court and the terrifying reach of his armies. Yet to his own people he was Kanuni, the lawgiver, a name that spoke to his profound dedication to justice and order. This duality, the conqueror and the codifier, the dazzling monarch and the meticulous administrator, defined the reign of Suleiman I, who ascended the Ottoman throne in 1520 at the age of 26. He inherited an empire already vast, a colossus spanning continents, but he was not content to merely safeguard his father's conquests. Suleiman envisioned something grander, a new epoch of Ottoman power and cultural brilliance. For 46 years he would rule, combining military genius with a clear legal vision, personal charisma with administrative rigor, guiding the empire to the absolute zenith of its power and influence. He was a figure of genuine historical greatness, a man whose impact resonated from the battlefields of Europe to the bustling markets of Asia and Africa. Suleiman swiftly established his reputation as a formidable conqueror, following in the footsteps of his warrior ancestors. In 1521, his armies thundered into Belgrade, a strategic fortress that had long resisted Ottoman expansion, and captured it, thereby opening the vital gateway to Central Europe. Just a year later, in 1522, he turned his attention to the Knights Hospitaller on the island of Rhodes. After a grueling 6-month siege, the last significant Christian naval stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean fell, eliminating a perpetual thorn in the side of Ottoman maritime power. But the true military centerpiece of Suleiman's early reign, a moment of almost apocalyptic scale, arrived in 1526 with the Battle of Mohacs. There, on the plains of Hungary, Suleiman's forces utterly annihilated the Hungarian army in a single afternoon. King Louis II of Hungary was killed, and the independent Hungarian state effectively ceased to exist. Mohacs was more than a victory, it was a cataclysm, the last major Christian kingdom standing between the Ottomans and the heart of Europe collapsing in a matter of hours, leaving a void that sent shivers of fear throughout the continent. The Ottoman tide, however, met its high watermark in 1529 at the gates of Vienna. Suleiman's vast army, fresh from its triumphs, advanced up the Danube, a seemingly unstoppable force. The terrified population of Vienna braced for what appeared to be certain conquest, while the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V desperately scrambled to assemble a relief force. The tension was palpable across Europe, as the fate of a continent seemed to hang in the balance. Yet, Vienna did not fall. The Ottoman failure was not a simple military defeat, but a complex interplay of factors. Overextended supply lines stretched thin across hundreds of miles, the relentless early autumn rains that turned roads into quagmires and bogged down the heavy siege artillery, and the stubborn, desperate resistance of the city's defenders. This was the moment the Ottoman surge into Europe reached its furthest point. From here, almost imperceptibly, the tide would begin to recede. Shifting from the thunder of cannons to the quiet hum of creation, Suleiman's reign was also a golden age of culture and intellect. The court, the mosque, the workshop and the library flourished under his patronage. Central to this artistic renaissance was the architectural genius of Mimar Sinan, the chief Ottoman architect, who designed over 300 buildings, including the incomparable Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul and the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne. His monumental works, characterized by their elegant domes, soaring minarets, and harmonious proportions, became the physical embodiment of Ottoman civilization at its peak, transforming the urban landscape. Beyond architecture, Suleiman's court fostered a vibrant literary culture, with the Sultan himself being an accomplished poet writing under the pen name Muhibbi. Philosophical debates thrived, medical advancements pushed the boundaries of knowledge, and cartographers produced detailed maps that reflected the empire's global reach. This era echoed the intellectual flourishing of Baghdad's Golden Age centuries earlier, suggesting that the Ottomans had not only recovered but surpassed the cultural achievements that the Mongol invasions had so brutally interrupted. Despite the outward splendor and unparalleled success, Suleiman's later years were shadowed by profound personal tragedies. The most devastating of these was the execution of his eldest son Mustafa in 1553. Mustafa, a popular figure with the Janissaries and widely regarded as the most capable of Suleiman's sons, was perceived by many as the rightful heir. However, a web of intrigue, widely believed to have been orchestrated by Suleiman's beloved wife Hurrem Sultan and her ally, the Grand Vizier Rustem Pasha, led the Sultan to believe that Mustafa was plotting against him. This episode stands as the defining personal tragedy of Suleiman's life, a testament to how even the greatest rulers could be manipulated by those closest to them, leading to the destruction of the very son who might have been his greatest legacy. It was a moment of almost Greek tragic inevitability. A great man brought low by suspicion and cunning. Suleiman himself died on campaign in Hungary in 1566, an old man of 72 who had spent his life in the saddle, forever campaigning. As his extraordinary reign concluded, a silent question hung over the empire. could the magnificent edifice he had built endure without the singular, formidable force of his personality? The silent question that hung over the empire, whether the magnificent edifice built by Suleiman could endure without his singular formidable force, was not merely rhetorical. It foreshadowed a shift, subtle at first but ultimately profound. Suleiman's reign, though often lauded as a golden age, also sowed the seeds of future challenges. His intense personal involvement in every aspect of governance, while effective during his lifetime, inadvertently created a system heavily reliant on his individual genius. Unlike earlier Ottoman sultans who often groomed their sons through governorships and military commands, the tragic elimination of Mustafa, coupled with the sequestering of other princes within the Topkapi palace, meant that future heirs often lacked the practical experience necessary to rule such a vast and complex empire. They were, in many cases, unprepared for the immense responsibilities that awaited them. Having spent their formative years in relative isolation, far from the battlefields and administrative intricacies that had forged their ancestors, the shift in the succession process, moving from a system where princes proved their mettle in the provinces to one of confinement within the palace, had far-reaching consequences. This practice, known as the kafes or cage, was intended to prevent fratricide and civil war, but it produced rulers who were often timid, susceptible to manipulation, and disconnected from the realities of their subjects and the military. The vibrant meritocratic system that had characterized the early Ottoman Empire, where even the highest offices were open to men of talent regardless of birth, began to erode. Favoritism and court intrigue started to play an increasingly dominant role in appointments, replacing the rigorous standards of merit and experience. This internal decay, slow and insidious, began to undermine the very foundations of the state that Suleiman had so meticulously cultivated. Furthermore, the scale of Suleiman's military campaigns, while bringing immense prestige and territory, also placed a significant strain on the empire's resources. The continuous warfare, though often victorious, necessitated a constant flow of men and material, stretching the administrative capacity and financial reserves of the state. While the Janissaries remained a formidable fighting force, their growing influence and occasional insubordination hinted at future problems. Their loyalty, once absolute to the Sultan, began to shift towards their own corporate interests, foreshadowing a period where they would become kingmakers and a source of instability rather than unwavering strength. The economic impact of such sustained military endeavors, combined with the gradual decline in the efficiency of the Taimar system, a land grant system that provided cavalrymen in exchange for land, meant that the empire would increasingly struggle to finance its ambitious projects in the centuries to come. The grand mosques, bridges, and aqueducts that adorned the cities under Suleiman, while testaments to his power and piety, also represented an enormous investment, one that future, less capable sultans would find difficult to replicate or even maintain. The passing of Suleiman also marked a turning point in the Ottoman Empire's relationship with Europe. During his reign, the Ottomans were largely on the offensive, dictating terms and expanding their dominion deep into the continent. After his death, while the empire remained a formidable power for some time, the momentum began to shift. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571, though a naval defeat that occurred after Suleiman's time, symbolized a growing challenge to Ottoman naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. The rise of powerful European states, with increasingly sophisticated military technologies and burgeoning colonial empires, would gradually begin to encircle and challenge Ottoman dominance. The age of unchallenged Ottoman expansion was drawing to a close, replaced by a more complex geopolitical landscape where the empire would increasingly find itself playing defense rather than offense. The internal challenges, coupled with these external pressures, would slowly but surely begin to chip away at the edges of the magnificent empire Suleiman had left behind, initiating a long, drawn-out period of transformation and eventually decline. Within Topkapi Palace, the Ottoman state's political architecture found elaborate expression, transforming stone and mortar into a sophisticated machine of governance. This was not merely a luxurious residence, but a meticulously designed hierarchy of power, with each courtyard signifying a different stratum of access and influence. The outer courts represented the public face of the empire, while the inner courts were restricted to the Sultan's immediate household and trusted advisors. Then, there was the innermost sanctum, the harem, a world often stereotyped in the West. Yet, the harem was, in reality, a complex political institution, a crucible where women of extraordinary intelligence and ambition vied for influence, shaping the destiny of an empire through their proximity to the most powerful man in the world. This hidden world came into sharp focus during the Sultanate of Women, spanning roughly from 1533 to 1656, when the mothers and wives of sultans wielded extraordinary political power. At the heart of this phenomenon was Hurrem Sultan, born Roxolana, a Ukrainian slave girl whose meteoric rise captivated the imperial court. Through sheer intelligence, undeniable charm, and a profound understanding of political maneuvering, she transcended her humble origins to become Suleiman's legal wife, a move unprecedented for an Ottoman sultan and one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Her story is a testament to the human drama unfolding within the palace walls. A woman of no birth or status who made herself indispensable to the most powerful ruler of her age. Following Hurrem, subsequent Valid sultans, the queen mothers, effectively governed the empire during the minority or incompetence of their sons, navigating complex political landscapes, negotiating with foreign powers, and appointing grand viziers. To comprehend Ottoman history fully, one must grasp the profound and often decisive political role these women played. The formal seat of Ottoman governance, the Divan or Imperial Council, convened regularly to manage the vast affairs of the empire, with the Grand Vizier acting as the Sultan's chief minister and effective head of government. This office evolved into the most powerful position in the empire after the Sultan himself. Grand Viziers commanded armies in distant lands, conducted delicate diplomatic negotiations, and oversaw the intricate bureaucratic machinery of a state that spanned 3 continents. Figures like Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's childhood friend and trusted Grand Vizier, exemplify the immense power and perilous nature of this role. Ibrahim was eventually strangled on the Sultan's orders, his story serving as a stark reminder of the extraordinary danger inherent in proximity to absolute power within the Ottoman system. The Sultan's word was law, and even the most favoured minister could fall from grace in an instant, often with fatal consequences. One of the central structural tensions that would increasingly plague the later Ottoman Empire was the growing political power of the Janissary Corps. Originally conceived as a force of absolute loyalty, an elite fighting unit bound solely to the Sultan, the Janissaries gradually transformed into a formidable political actor in their own right. Their immense military prowess and strategic importance granted them leverage that they were not afraid to use. They became kingmakers, capable of deposing sultans they deemed unsatisfactory, and demanding ever greater privileges, pay, and influence over imperial policy. The periodic Janissary revolts, often signalled by the dramatic overturning of their soup cauldrons, a symbolic rejection of their daily rations and, by extension, the Sultan's authority, were moments of intense drama and instability. These armed men, stationed in the very heart of the capital, threatened the very institution they were sworn to serve, presenting one of history's great institutional paradoxes, a tool designed to enforce absolute power, ultimately becoming a significant obstacle to it. The Devshirme system, which created the Janissaries and many of the empire's administrators, also facilitated remarkable social mobility, though it was built upon a fundamental injustice. This system, which forcibly recruited Christian boys from the Balkans, offered a unique pathway for individuals of humble birth to rise to the highest echelons of Ottoman society. Individual stories abound of men born as Christian peasants who, through intelligence, hard work, and unwavering loyalty, ascended to become grand viziers, renowned admirals, and master architects like Mimar Sinan. Their original identities were subsumed into a new, often genuinely multicultural Ottoman identity. This paradox lies at the heart of the Ottoman system, an empire that was simultaneously one of the most tolerant in its acceptance of diverse peoples and religions, yet also one of the most coercive in its methods of recruitment and control. It created unparalleled opportunities for advancement for some, while denying basic freedoms to others, celebrating diversity within its ranks while demanding absolute conformity to its imperial will. This intricate blend of contradictions, of opportunity and oppression, of tolerance and coercion, is precisely what makes the Ottoman story so endlessly fascinating and complex. The empire's embrace of diversity, though often born of pragmatic necessity, manifested in various forms. Jewish communities expelled from Spain found refuge and prosperity within Ottoman lands, particularly in cities like Salonika, where they formed a vibrant intellectual and economic hub. Greek Orthodox Christians largely maintained their religious and cultural autonomy under the millet system, a framework that granted non-Muslim communities considerable self-governance in personal law, education and religious practice, provided they paid specific taxes and acknowledged Ottoman suzerainty. This system, while not without its limitations, stood in stark contrast to the religious persecutions and forced conversions prevalent in many contemporary European states. The Ottomans understood the value of skilled labor, trade networks, and intellectual contributions from all their subjects, leveraging these diverse talents to build and sustain their vast dominion. However, this tolerance existed alongside a rigid hierarchy and the ever-present shadow of state power. The Devshirme system, for instance, which recruited Christian boys for state service, forcibly removed them from their families and cultural heritage, converting them to Islam and training them to be loyal servants of the Sultan. While it offered a path to immense power and influence for some, it was fundamentally an act of state-sanctioned abduction and cultural assimilation. Similarly, while non-Muslims were protected, they were undeniably second-class citizens, subject to specific dress codes, judicial limitations, and the aforementioned jizya tax, which, though often lighter than taxes paid by Muslims, served as a constant reminder of their subordinate status. This intricate balance between protection and subjugation, between integration and distinction, shaped the lives of millions across 3 continents for centuries. The Ottoman Empire also engaged in extensive diplomatic relations with European powers, not always from a position of strength, but often through sophisticated negotiations and strategic alliances. From the 16th century onwards, the empire became a significant player in European power politics, often aligning with Protestant states against Catholic Habsburg dominance, demonstrating a pragmatic foreign policy that transcended religious divides when imperial interests were at stake. The capitulations, a series of treaties granting extraterritorial rights and economic privileges to European merchants within the Ottoman Empire, represent another facet of this complex interaction. While initially seen as a sign of Ottoman strength and a tool to encourage trade, they gradually became a vehicle for European intervention and economic penetration, contributing to the empire's later decline. This dynamic interplay between internal diversity and external relations, between strategic alliance and burgeoning vulnerability, further illuminates the multifaceted nature of the Ottoman experience. The artistic and architectural achievements of the Ottoman Empire stand as enduring testaments to its cultural richness and imperial ambition. Mimar Sinan, the chief Ottoman architect for Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, Selim II, and Murad III, transformed the urban landscape with his monumental mosques, bridges, and charitable complexes. His works, like the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul or the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, showcase a synthesis of Byzantine, Persian, and Islamic architectural traditions, characterized by soaring domes, slender minarets, and meticulously crafted tile work. These structures were not merely places of worship, they were integrated social centers, encompassing schools, hospitals, hammams, and soup kitchens, reflecting a holistic approach to urban planning and public welfare. The vibrant miniature paintings, intricate calligraphy, and luxurious textiles produced during the Ottoman Golden Age further underscore the empire's aesthetic sophistication and its ability to absorb and transform artistic influences from across its vast territories. These cultural expressions, like the empire itself, were a rich tapestry woven from diverse threads, creating a unique and enduring legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. The empire's decline was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual erosion, marked by internal strife, administrative corruption, and the relentless pressure of rising European powers, ultimately leading to its dissolution after World War I. However, its historical footprint, its institutional innovations, and its profound cultural impact continue to resonate deeply in the modern world, shaping the identities and geopolitics of numerous nations. The Mediterranean Sea, a shimmering expanse of blue, served as the beating heart of 16th century geopolitics, a liquid arena connecting 3 continents and determining the fate of empires. In the early 1500s, this contested space seethed with extraordinary complexity, a chessboard upon which the mighty Ottoman Empire, expanding inexorably from the east, clashed with the formidable Spanish Habsburg Empire. Dominant in the west, the ancient Venetian Republic, a shadow of its former glory, clung precariously to its island outposts and coastal trading posts, while the North African coast remained a volatile frontier, a patchwork of shifting allegiances and independent corsair states. Control of these azure waters meant dominion over the trade routes of the known world, and the struggle for that control would ignite one of the defining conflicts of the age, a brutal, relentless contest for maritime supremacy. Into this maelstrom stepped Hayreddin Barbarossa, a figure of almost mythical proportions, one of history's most extraordinary naval commanders. Born on the sun-drenched Greek island of Lesbos, the son of a Turkish soldier and a Greek woman, Barbarossa, alongside his elder brother Arouge, forged a fearsome pirate empire along the North African coast. Their exploits became legendary, their ships striking terror into the hearts of Christian merchants and navies alike. But Hayreddin possessed a vision beyond mere plunder. In a stroke of strategic genius, he offered his service and his hard-won territories to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a pragmatic exchange for Ottoman support against the encroaching Spanish. This transformation from a notorious corsair to the Grand Admiral of the Ottoman fleet marks one of history's most remarkable career arcs. A man who had lived his life outside the bounds of law now became the enforcer of the greatest empire in the world. His campaigns in the Western Mediterranean were a relentless display of naval prowess, raiding the coasts of Spain and Italy with impunity, liberating Muslim captives from Christian slavery, and systematically establishing Ottoman suzerainty over much of North Africa, turning it into a vital strategic base against the Habsburgs. The mid-16th century witnessed a succession of titanic naval engagements, none more decisive than the Battle of Preveza in 1538. There, off the coast of modern-day Greece, Barbarossa's Ottoman fleet confronted a combined Christian armada assembled by Pope Paul III, a formidable force under the command of Andrea Doria, the Genoese admiral in Habsburg service. The sea churned with maneuvering galleys, their oars beating a rhythmic tattoo against the waves, as cannon smoke billowed across the water, obscuring the desperate, hand-to-hand fighting that erupted on the decks. Barbarossa, displaying unparalleled tactical brilliance, outmaneuvered and outfought his Christian adversaries. The air was thick with the roar of cannon, the clang of steel, and the cries of men, until, in a pivotal moment, the Christian fleet broke and fled, shattered and dispersed. The victory at Preveza cemented Ottoman naval supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean, a triumph that echoed the land victory at Mohacs, seemingly rendering further resistance futile and marking the Ottomans as an unstoppable force on both land and sea. Yet, the myth of Ottoman naval invincibility would eventually be shattered at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, the greatest naval engagement of the 16th century and a conflict etched into the annals of history. The tension leading up to this monumental clash was palpable, as Pope Pius V, alarmed by Ottoman expansion, forged the Holy League, a formidable alliance of Catholic maritime powers, primarily Spain, Venice, and the Papal States. Their combined fleet, an armada of hundreds of galleys and galleasses, assembled under the youthful but brilliant command of Don John of Austria, the half-brother of King Philip II of Spain. The two colossal fleets converged in the Gulf of Patras, a narrow stretch of water off the western coast of Greece. Hundreds of ships locked in a brutal embrace, their hulls grinding against each other as thousands of men, Christian and Muslim alike, perished in the churning waters and on the blood-soaked decks. The battle raged for hours, a maelstrom of fire, steel, and desperate courage, its outcome hanging precariously in the balance until the final hours. The Christian victory was absolute, a devastating blow that annihilated the Ottoman fleet. However, the complexity of history rarely allows for simple narratives. While the Ottomans lost their fleet, they did not lose their empire, and with astonishing speed and resilience, they constructed a new fleet within 2 years, reconquering Cyprus and demonstrating that their naval power, though wounded, was far from broken. The long-term significance of this intense Mediterranean struggle reshaped the balance of power between the Ottoman Empire and Christian Europe. The period following Lepanto saw a gradual, almost imperceptible shift in strategic priorities. The Ottomans increasingly turned their gaze eastward, focusing their immense military machine on the persistent frontier with Persia, while the Spanish and Venetians, exhausted by decades of conflict, consolidated their positions primarily in the Western Mediterranean. This era also began to reveal the subtle signs of strategic overextension affecting the Ottoman Empire. Fighting on too many fronts simultaneously, from the plains of Hungary to the deserts of Persia and across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean, required an enormous military apparatus that demanded constant, indeed escalating revenues to sustain. The very scale of Ottoman success, the sheer breadth of their dominion, was paradoxically beginning to create the conditions for future difficulties, a theme of immense consequence that would come to dominate the chapters yet to unfold. The extraordinary reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, a golden age of Ottoman power and cultural brilliance, was followed by a stark contrast of mediocrity and decline, a shift that began to undermine the very foundations of the empire. Selim II, Suleiman's son by the formidable Hurrem Sultan, ascended to the throne, yet his interests lay far from the battlefield or the council chambers. He was a man more inclined to the pleasures of wine and poetry, earning him the moniker the Sot. Effective power during his tenure largely devolved to his Grand Vizier, Sukolu Mehmed Pasha, a figure of immense capability and one of the most astute administrators in Ottoman history, who for a time managed to steer the vast imperial ship with a steady hand. However, this delegation of authority set a dangerous precedent. The succession through the late 16th and early 17th centuries saw a series of sultans, many of whom were either mentally unstable, politically inept, or both. This pattern of governance by proxy, where the sultan's authority was increasingly hollowed out and exercised by powerful viziers or court factions, gradually eroded the centralized power that had been the hallmark of earlier Ottoman rulers. A particularly self-destructive institutional innovation that profoundly impacted the quality of Ottoman leadership was the practice of kafes, or the cage, designed to prevent the fratricide that had stained earlier successions and to curb the emergence of rival power bases among princes. This system confined potential heirs within the palace from birth. These young princes spent their entire lives in gilded isolation, denied any meaningful education in statecraft, military experience, or genuine human relationships. They were effectively prisoners, their world circumscribed by palace walls, their only companions often eunuchs and concubines. Then, with the sudden death of a reigning sultan, one of these cloistered individuals, utterly unprepared and often psychologically scarred by years of confinement, would be thrust onto the throne of one of the world's most powerful empires. This system, intended to secure dynastic stability, inadvertently produced a generation of rulers ill-equipped to meet the complex demands of governing, ironically making the empire more vulnerable to political instability and manipulation by court factions. Compounding these internal political frailties were powerful external economic pressures that began to buffet the empire in the late 16th century. The most significant of these was the price revolution, a global phenomenon triggered by the vast influx of silver from the Spanish mines of the New World into the world economy. Massive quantities of this precious metal, primarily from Potosi, flooded European markets and then, through trade, permeated the Mediterranean world, including the Ottoman Empire. This sudden abundance of silver caused widespread inflation, dramatically eroding the purchasing power of the fixed salaries paid to Ottoman soldiers, particularly the janissaries, and to administrative officials. This economic disruption had direct and severe political ramifications. Unpaid or drastically underpaid soldiers, their livelihoods threatened, became increasingly mutinous, transforming from loyal servants of the Sultan into a source of rebellion and unrest. Simultaneously, provincial administrators, struggling to maintain their positions and wealth in a depreciating economy, resorted to increased taxation, extortion, and corruption, further alienating the populace and weakening central authority. The global flow of silver thus directly fueled local political breakdown, creating a vicious cycle of economic hardship and social unrest. These deep-seated social crises manifested dramatically in the form of the Selali rebellions, a series of widespread popular uprisings that convulsed Anatolia throughout the late 16th and early 17th centuries. These were not mere bandit incursions, but complex social phenomena, reflecting a profound breakdown of order. The ranks of the Selali rebels swelled with a diverse array of disaffected individuals, displaced soldiers, often demobilized from costly wars or unpaid due to the economic crisis, dispossessed peasants, driven from their lands by rapacious local officials or economic hardship, unemployed scholars, their traditional patrons unable to support them, and ambitious local leaders seizing the opportunity presented by the weakening central authority. The devastation wrought by these rebellions was immense. Countless villages were burned, agricultural production collapsed, and vast populations were displaced, creating a landscape of desolation and despair. This human toll made the abstract concept of imperial decline viscerally real, demonstrating the catastrophic consequences of internal decay and economic strain on the lives of ordinary people. The empire's military supremacy, a cornerstone of its power, was definitively challenged during the Long War with the Habsburg Empire, which raged from 1593 to 1606. This protracted conflict, fought primarily in Hungary, was a brutal and costly affair for both sides, draining treasuries and lives. Unlike previous Ottoman victories that decisively established dominance, this war concluded with a negotiated peace, the Treaty of Zivotvorok, which for the first time treated the Habsburg Emperor as an equal to the Ottoman Sultan rather than a tributary. This was a profound psychological as well as military watershed, signaling that the era of uncontested Ottoman expansion in Europe had ended. Imperial decline rarely announces itself with a single cataclysmic event. Instead, it creeps in through 1,000 small failures, a corruption here, a lost battle there, a reform delayed, a talent wasted. The empire that Suleiman had built remained vast and undeniably powerful, yet something fundamental had changed. The question lingered, unasked in the grand halls of Topkapi, but perhaps whispered in the ravaged villages of Anatolia. Did anyone within the empire truly comprehend the profound shift occurring before it was too late? The mid-17th century, often perceived as a period of Ottoman decay, instead witnessed a remarkable institutional revival, largely orchestrated by the Köprülü family of Grand Viziers. These formidable figures effectively took control from increasingly weak sultans, restoring significant administrative order and military effectiveness to an empire on the brink. Central to this resurgence was Köprülü Mehmed Pasha, who became Grand Vizier in 1656 at nearly 80 years old. A man of ferocious energy and zero tolerance for corruption, he reportedly executed over 30,000 people in 5 years to restore discipline and central authority. He believed such radical measures were necessary to save the ailing empire, and given its perilous state, his brutal assessment may have been entirely correct. Under Köprülü leadership, the Ottoman military proved capable of extraordinary achievements when properly led. This era saw significant successes, including the protracted conquest of Crete from Venice, a siege lasting an astonishing 21 years, the longest in recorded history. Crete finally fell in 1669, marking the last great Ottoman territorial acquisition in the Mediterranean. Generations of soldiers fought and died there, a testament to the immense human cost of imperial ambition. Beyond Crete, the Köprülüs also orchestrated successful campaigns against the formidable Habsburgs and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, demonstrating the revitalized Ottoman military could still project power across its vast borders. This set the stage for the final great Ottoman military surge, spearheaded by Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Grand Vizier who led the imperial army to Vienna in 1683. Kara Mustafa, a man of genuine ability and ambition, was fatally flawed by overwhelming overconfidence. He dreamed of conquering Vienna and making it the new capital of the Ottoman Empire in Europe, a symbolic and strategic move to solidify Ottoman dominance. Political dynamics at the Ottoman court, with the young Sultan Mehmed IV, allowed Kara Mustafa to launch this enormous gamble. The march to Vienna was a spectacle of immense scale, a vast Ottoman army moving inexorably through the Balkans, hundreds of thousands of men, countless animals, and a formidable array of cannons stretched for miles. A civilization confident in its divine destiny, the Siege of Vienna in 1683 unfolded with dramatic intensity. Ottoman forces invested the city, their trenches creeping closer to the formidable walls, while desperate defenders, led by Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, valiantly resisted. The Ottomans employed sophisticated mining techniques, attempting to breach the defences, but each attempt met with fierce countermining and desperate resistance. As supplies dwindled and hope waned, the city seemed on the verge of collapse. Then a relief army, primarily Polish forces led by King Jan III Sobieski and his legendary winged hussars, appeared on the Kallenberg Heights overlooking Vienna. The ensuing Battle of Vienna was a dramatic reversal, a moment when a civilization poised for triumph was suddenly, shockingly defeated. Kara Mustafa Pasha's ignominious flight from the battlefield and subsequent execution by strangling sealed the fate of his audacious yet failed ambition. The defeat at Vienna proved to be the true turning point in Ottoman-European relations, a civilizational watershed. What followed was the Great Turkish War, a concerted effort by the Holy League, comprising the Habsburgs, Venice, Poland, and later Russia, to push back against Ottoman power. This prolonged conflict saw the Ottomans driven out of Hungary, Transylvania, and significant parts of the Balkans, marking the beginning of their long retreat from Europe. The Treaty of Kalovets in 1699, which formally ended the war, was a profound psychological and political shock to the Ottoman Empire. For the first time in its 3-century history of relentless expansion, the Ottomans were forced to cede vast territories under military pressure. Vienna 1683 was not just a military defeat, it was the moment the long Ottoman advance into Europe definitively ended and the long, slow retreat began, forever altering the geopolitical landscape of the continent. This retreat was not a sudden collapse, but a protracted, often agonizing, process spanning centuries, characterized by intermittent periods of reform and resurgence alongside continuous territorial losses and internal decay. The once feared Janissaries, once the vanguard of Ottoman expansion, had become a powerful, conservative, and often rebellious force within the empire. More interested in protecting their privileges than in military innovation, their resistance to modernization, particularly the adoption of Western military tactics and technologies, significantly hampered the Ottoman ability to compete with increasingly professionalized European armies. Meanwhile, the central administration in Istanbul, once a marvel of efficiency, grew increasingly corrupt and decentralized. Provincial governors and local elites began to assert greater autonomy, often defying the sultan's authority and diverting resources away from the imperial coffers. This internal fragmentation weakened the empire's capacity to respond effectively to external threats. The economic foundations of the empire also began to erode. The age of exploration had shifted global trade routes away from the traditional Silk Road and spice routes, which had historically enriched the Ottoman Empire. European powers established direct maritime links with Asia, bypassing the Ottoman intermediaries and diminishing their customs revenues. Furthermore, the influx of silver from the New World into Europe led to significant inflation, which destabilized the Ottoman economy and devalued its currency. The capitulations, a series of treaties granting extraterritorial rights and trade privileges to European merchants, further exacerbated these economic woes, allowing European goods to flood Ottoman markets with low tariffs, often outcompeting local industries. This economic penetration contributed to the deindustrialization of certain Ottoman regions and fostered a growing dependence on European trade and finance. The intellectual and scientific dynamism that had characterized earlier periods of Islamic civilization also waned. While Europe experienced the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, the Ottoman educational system, largely centered around madrasas, became increasingly rigid, focusing on religious studies and traditional disciplines at the expense of empirical science and critical inquiry. This intellectual stagnation meant that the Ottomans fell behind in fields like mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, which were crucial for military and technological advancement. The printing press, for example, was introduced relatively late into the Ottoman Empire compared to Europe, and its use was initially restricted, further hindering the dissemination of knowledge and ideas. This widening gap in scientific and technological prowess would prove increasingly detrimental in an era defined by rapid industrialization and innovation in the West. The 18th century saw a series of wars with Russia, a rising power to the north, which further chipped away at Ottoman territories and prestige. The Russo-Turkish Wars, particularly those culminating in the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774, were particularly devastating. This treaty not only ceded significant lands, including the Crimea, a strategically vital region, but also granted Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire, effectively providing Russia with The 18th century dawned upon an Ottoman Empire increasingly out of step with a rapidly changing Europe, a continent undergoing revolutionary transformations that would reshape global power dynamics. While the Ottomans clung to ancient ways, Europe was swept by the scientific revolution, which birthed new understandings of the natural world and fueled technological innovation. The Enlightenment challenged traditional political and social structures, fostering ideas of individual rights and national sovereignty that would soon ignite revolutions across the continent. Simultaneously, the nascent stirrings of the Industrial Revolution were beginning to mechanize production and redefine economic power, leading to advancements in manufacturing and, crucially, in the technology of warfare. These forces combined to create a dynamism in European militaries, economies, and political thought that the institutional conservatism of the Ottoman system simply could not match. It was not a simple story of Western superiority, but rather a tragedy of timing, as an empire whose institutions had been honed to perfection for the medieval world found itself tragically stranded in a new age for which it had not been designed. The mounting military defeats of the 18th century starkly illustrated this growing disparity. A series of devastating wars with Russia, first under Peter the Great and later under Catherine the Great, systematically eroded Ottoman control over vast territories, particularly around the crucial Black Sea region. Russia, a burgeoning imperial power, emerged as an existential threat, relentlessly pushing south. The Treaty of Kuchu-Kanaji in 1774, which concluded a catastrophic war with Catherine's Russia, stands as a particularly grim milestone. This treaty not only forced the Ottomans to cede significant lands, including the strategically vital Crimea, but also granted Russia the unprecedented right to intervene on behalf of Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire. This provision proved to be a diplomatic Trojan horse, planting the seeds of perpetual interference and providing a pretext for future Russian expansion, a diplomatic weapon that would be exploited repeatedly in the century to come and ultimately contribute to the empire's eventual dissolution. In the face of such overwhelming challenges, a few courageous sultans recognized the dire necessity of reform. Selim III, reigning at the close of the 18th century, was one such visionary who understood the crisis facing his empire and attempted to address it with genuine intelligence and courage. His most ambitious project was the creation of the Nizami Sedid, or New Order Army, a bold attempt to establish a European-style military force, trained and equipped with modern tactics and weaponry, to stand alongside the traditional Ottoman institutions. However, this radical departure from established norms met fierce resistance from the entrenched Janissary corps, who saw their power and privilege threatened. This profound institutional conservatism ultimately led to Selim's overthrow and tragic murder, a stark illustration of the internal obstacles to necessary change. His successor, Mahmud II, learned from Selim's fate. He too recognized the deeply corrosive influence of the Janissaries, who had become a law unto themselves, more interested in palace intrigue and personal gain than in defending the empire. In 1826, Mahmud executed one of the most dramatic acts of political surgery in Ottoman history, orchestrating the wholesale destruction of the Janissary corps in what became known as the Auspicious Incident. This brutal but decisive move saw the Sultan literally destroy his own army, eliminating the primary obstacle to modernization and creating the necessary space for a new, European-trained military. Yet, even as Mahmud II was asserting central authority, the empire was being assailed by new forces. The Greek War of Independence, erupting in 1821 and lasting until 1829, served as a stark case study in the multiple crises simultaneously tearing at the empire's fabric. This was not merely a military conflict, it was a civilizational and ideological challenge, representing the first successful nationalist uprising within the Ottoman Empire, inspired by the Enlightenment ideals of self-determination and supported by European powers who, seeing in the modern Greeks a connection to their own classical heritage, championed their cause. The intervention of Britain, France, and Russia on behalf of the Greeks, culminating in the decisive destruction of the Ottoman-Egyptian fleet at the Battle of Navarino in 1827, marked a pivotal moment. It signaled that the European powers now viewed the Ottoman Empire not as a power to be respected, but as a problem to be managed, a decaying entity whose fate would increasingly be dictated by external forces. This precarious state gave rise to what became known as the Eastern Question, the defining diplomatic dilemma of the 19th century. What was to be done with an Ottoman Empire that was too weak to maintain its vast territories, yet whose sudden collapse would trigger a catastrophic scramble among the European powers, potentially leading to a continent-wide war? The empire became famously known as the sick man of Europe, a phrase attributed to Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, reflecting the profound humiliation this represented for a dynasty that had once been the most feared power in the world. The Ottoman Empire was now fighting not just for territory, but for its very right to exist, a desperate struggle for survival. The reforms undertaken throughout the 19th century, therefore, were not born of confidence or strength, but of a profound and desperate need to modernize fast enough to avert total collapse in a world that had utterly outpaced it. The Tanzimat, or reorganization, represented the most ambitious internal transformation the Ottoman state had ever attempted, a sweeping program launched in the 1830s to drag the empire into the modern world. It was an earnest effort by a generation of Ottoman statesmen who understood that the old ways were no longer sustainable, that the empire had to adapt or perish. These reforms touched every aspect of public life. A new legal code promised equal rights to all subjects regardless of their religion. A radical departure from centuries of Islamic law. Secular schools were established alongside religious ones, aiming to create a modern educated class, and a centralized administration sought to bring order to a sprawling, often chaotic empire. The vision was to forge a new, inclusive Ottoman identity, one that could transcend the myriad ethnic and religious divisions that constantly threatened to tear the empire apart. These reformers, with their genuine desire to save the realm, faced an almost impossible contradiction: how to build a modern, liberal state, complete with a constitution and representative institutions, while simultaneously preserving the autocratic power of the Sultan, a figure whose authority was rooted in divine right and tradition. The Crimean War, erupting in 1853, starkly illustrated the empire's diminishing self-reliance, pushing it firmly into the role of a client state. Britain and France, wary of Russian expansion into the Balkans and towards the Mediterranean, intervened to protect the Ottomans, effectively fighting Russia on the empire's behalf. This intervention came at a steep price. The Ottoman Empire became deeply indebted to European banks, accumulating loans it could never hope to repay, and in return accepted increasing European supervision over its finances and internal administration. This foreign entanglement culminated in the Congress of Berlin in 1878, following another devastating Russo-Turkish war. There, the European powers carved up vast Ottoman territories in the Balkans, with Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro all gaining either full independence or significant autonomy. The Congress of Berlin marked the effective end of the Ottoman Empire's European dimension, a humiliating testament to its inability to defend itself without external aid. Out of this continuous decline emerged the Young Turk movement and the Revolution of 1908, representing the last desperate gamble to save the empire through radical political change. The Committee of Union and Progress, as the Young Turks were formerly known, comprised a generation of military officers and intellectuals who had watched with growing horror as the empire hemorrhaged territory year after year. They were convinced that only a constitutional government and a new unifying Turkish nationalist ideology could reverse the seemingly inevitable decline. When they forced Sultan Abdul Hamid II to restore the constitution in 1908, effectively seizing control of the government, it was met with a wave of euphoria across the empire. Crowds danced in the streets of Istanbul, believing that a new era of freedom and strength was dawning. This hope, however, proved tragically short-lived. The Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 swiftly followed, stripping the empire of almost all its remaining European possessions and deepening the sense of crisis. Amidst this maelstrom of territorial loss and political upheaval, one of the 20th century's gravest crimes unfolded: the Armenian Genocide. Beginning in 1915, under the cover of wartime exigencies, the Young Turk government systematically deported and massacred the Armenian population of Anatolia. This was not merely a tragic byproduct of war. It was a deliberate, organized campaign of extermination, a horrific act driven by a desperate and paranoid regime. Estimates of the dead range from 600,000 to 1.5 million, each number representing an individual life brutally extinguished, families shattered, and an ancient culture decimated. While political sensitivities surrounding this event persist, the historical consensus is clear. This was a genocide, a crime against humanity on an unimaginable scale. It stands as a dark testament to the empire's terminal crisis, a government so driven by the urge for survival that it turned with murderous intent against its own subjects. The final act of the Ottoman drama played out on the battlefields of the First World War. The disastrous decision to ally with Germany, fueled by a desperate hope to regain lost territories and prestige, sealed the empire's fate. On every front, from Mesopotamia to the Caucasus, the Ottoman armies suffered catastrophic defeats. The one shining exception was the Gallipoli campaign of 1915, where Ottoman forces, under the brilliant leadership of Mustafa Kemal, successfully repelled a massive Allied invasion, securing a vital victory against overwhelming odds. This moment of strategic genius would elevate Kemal to national hero status, foreshadowing his pivotal role in the empire's aftermath. The war, however, was ultimately lost. The armistice of 1918 brought an end to hostilities, but not to the empire's agony. Istanbul, the ancient capital, was occupied by Allied forces, and the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 effectively carved up what little remained of the Ottoman Empire among the victorious powers. The Sultan became a mere puppet, his authority evaporated. The once mighty dynasty, which had ruled for over 6 centuries, was dead, its lands partitioned, its capital under foreign control. The question that lingered in the smoke and rubble was whether anything at all, could be salvaged from this agonizing wreckage. Mustafa Kemal emerged from the smouldering ruins of the Ottoman Empire as one of the 20th century's most extraordinary political and military figures, a man destined to forge an entirely new state from its Anatolian core. Born in Thessaloniki, a vibrant Ottoman port city, his early life was shaped by a military education that instilled in him discipline and strategic acumen. He served with distinction in various Ottoman campaigns, from North Africa to the Balkans. But it was his moment of glory at Gallipoli in 1915, where his leadership decisively repelled the Allied invasion, that catapulted him into national prominence. This victory, against seemingly insurmountable odds, cemented his belief that the Ottoman system was irrevocably broken, and that a radical, entirely new vision was required to secure the future of the Turkish people. Kemal was a man of fierce intelligence and an iron will, possessing a genuine revolutionary vision that sought to dismantle centuries of tradition. Yet, his methods often mirrored the authoritarianism of the sultans he replaced, presenting a complex figure, a liberator who also wielded immense, often unquestioned power. The Turkish War of Independence, unfolding from 1919 to 1923, stands as one of the most remarkable military and political achievements of the 20th century. In 1919, the situation appeared utterly hopeless for what remained of the Ottoman lands. Greek forces had landed at Smyrna, French and Italian troops occupied vast swathes of Anatolia, British forces controlled Istanbul, and the Sultan's government, a mere pawn of the Allied powers, was signing away the empire's last territories. Against this backdrop of apparent total defeat, Kemal, from the rugged interior of Anatolia, began to organize a desperate resistance. He painstakingly built a new national army from the shattered remnants of the Ottoman military, rallying a demoralized populace with a powerful vision of self-determination. His subsequent campaigns against the Greek, French, and Armenian forces were an almost miraculous reversal of fortune, culminating in the expulsion of all foreign occupation. The reconquest of Smyrna in 1922, however, was accompanied by the Great Fire, a devastating catastrophe that claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Greek and Armenian civilians. A tragic and morally complex event that stains the triumph of Turkish independence. The abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate in 1922, followed by the Caliphate in 1924, represented the most radical rupture in the history of the Muslim world since the Mongol destruction of Baghdad. In November 1922, the last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI, departed Istanbul on a British warship, sailing away from a dynasty that had ruled for 6 centuries, a moment imbued with profound pathos. 2 years later, the Caliphate, an institution the Ottomans had held since Selim I conquered Egypt in 1517, was also abolished. This act sent shockwaves across the entire Muslim world, from Cairo to Delhi to Jakarta. For communities that had looked to the Ottoman Caliph as a spiritual anchor, its dissolution created an immense sense of loss and disorientation, leaving a void that continues to be debated and felt even today. Ataturk's radical transformation of Turkish society through the Kemalist reforms of the 1920s and 1930s constituted one of history's most ambitious social engineering projects. The adoption of the Latin alphabet, the abolition of religious courts, the introduction of Western legal codes, the emancipation of women, and the ban on traditional religious dress were not merely modernization efforts. They were a profound and often painful rupture with centuries of tradition. Turkish national identity was redefined in fiercely secular terms, a dramatic departure from its Ottoman past. While the Turkish Republic Ataturk built was in many ways more prosperous and stable than the empire it replaced, these reforms, for all their genuine achievements, came with significant cultural and spiritual costs, representing a coercive reshaping of a deeply ingrained societal fabric. The Ottoman Empire's legacy reverberates across the modern world, bringing this historical journey to its emotional and intellectual conclusion. Its influence is etched into the very fabric of the 25 modern nations that emerged from its vast territory, stretching from Turkey to Greece, Egypt, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. Many of the borders, institutions, and enduring conflicts that define the contemporary Middle East and Balkans are direct products of Ottoman history. The Ottoman model of governance, a complex tapestry of tolerance and tyranny, cosmopolitanism and violence, remains a template whose lessons the modern world continues to debate. Returning to the image of Osman's dream, the great tree whose branches once covered the world has now fallen, yet its roots remain, shaping the very soil of 3 continents, feeding the present with the indelible memory of the past. The story of the Ottoman Empire is not merely the chronicle of a vanished dominion, it is the profound narrative of how the modern world was made, a testament to 6 centuries of human ambition, faith, cruelty, creativity, and endurance.